You might think Rick's tragic backstory is a recent event, but the destruction of his original family and the subsequent decades of his interdimensional rampage actually predate the main series by an astonishingly long time, shaping his character long before he ever moved in with Beth. We're talking about a man who spent what appears to be somewhere between 30 and 50 years. The show is genuinely vague about this, hunting down the version of himself who murdered his wife and daughter, building weapons that could crack open realities, befriending and then betraying entire civilizations, and at some point along the way, helping to construct a literal city-state made entirely of alternate versions of himself and his grandson, which is its own kind of narcissistic nightmare when you think about it for more than 5 seconds. The show presents itself as a cynical sci-fi comedy about a drunk genius dragging his grandson through increasingly absurd adventures, and it is that. But underneath all the interdimensional cable and pickle jokes, there's this sprawling mythology about infinite realities, the nature of choice and identity, a multiverse-spanning government of Ricks that operates like a fascist bureaucracy, and the question of whether any version of Rick Sanchez can ever actually escape being Rick Sanchez, which the show answers in increasingly depressing ways as it goes on. What makes the lore genuinely strange is how the writers spent the first few seasons actively mocking the idea that any of this should matter. Rick literally tells Morty in season 1 that their adventures are just meaningless fun and nothing matters, and then they slowly, almost reluctantly, start building this dense interconnected continuity where everything matters quite a lot actually, including that throwaway line about Morty's math teacher. And by season 5, they're doing full flashback episodes that recontextualize the entire series. The timeline doesn't move in a straight line either. We get the present-day adventures mixed with flashbacks that jump around Rick's past, flash sideways to what other Ricks are doing in parallel dimensions, and at least 3 separate timeline reset events that may or may not have actually reset anything, depending on how you interpret the rules. They established about timeline travel versus dimension travel, which are apparently different things, and the show will absolutely not clarify which one is happening at any given moment. To understand any of it, and I mean actually understand why Rick keeps a picture of a young Morty in his wallet, despite Morty only being 14 and Rick having only lived with the family for roughly the same amount of time, or how there's a version of Rick's dead daughter who's now an adult and also evil, or why the entire Citadel of Ricks treats our Rick like a terrorist, while also kind of respecting him. We have to go back to the very beginning, before the Smith family, before the portal gun, to whenever it was that Rick Sanchez was actually happy, which lasted about as long as you'd expect. So before we talk about infinite universes, or the Council of Ricks, or any of the multiverse-scale chaos that defines this show, we need to talk about the one Rick who actually said no. Rick Sanchez, designation C-137, the Rick the entire series follows, started out as a guy who turned down godhood because he liked his life, and that decision is the reason literally everything else happens. We're going decades before the main timeline here. Back when Rick is younger, his hair is darker, and he's genuinely, verifiably happy. This is pre-portal gun, pre-alcoholism, pre-everything that makes Rick the walking disaster we know. He's living in what appears to be a completely normal suburban house with his wife Diane and their daughter Beth, who's maybe 10 years old at this point. The garage is already his workspace. That part was apparently always true, but instead of building universe-ending weapons or interdimensional spacecraft, he's just tinkering. We see him working on various inventions, nothing particularly reality-breaking, just the kind of stuff a genius-level scientist might mess around with in his spare time. Anti-gravity demos, energy experiments, the usual garage science fair, but actually functional, because, you know, Rick. And here's the thing that the show makes extremely clear in these flashbacks. Rick is content. not just tolerating domestic life while secretly yearning for adventure, actually content. Diane is shown bringing him drinks while he works. They're affectionate, they joke around. Beth runs into the garage excited to show him things, and he stops what he's doing to pay attention to her. This is important because the entire emotional foundation of the series rests on understanding that Rick didn't start out as someone who viewed attachment as weakness or family as a burden. He had it, he liked it, he chose it. The tragedy isn't that a lonely genius finally found connection. It's that someone who already had everything lost it. The show doesn't give us a ton of detail about what exactly Rick was working on during this period, but we can see it's sophisticated. He's clearly already operating at a level beyond conventional science. There are energy fields, hovering objects, things that glow in ways that normal garage equipment definitely doesn't glow, but it's all small scale, domestic. He's a guy with the intellectual capacity to reshape reality, who's instead using that brain to build interesting toys, and presumably do whatever pays the bills, though the show never actually addresses what Rick's day job was. If he even had one, maybe he was freelancing, maybe Diane was the breadwinner, I genuinely have no idea. The show does not care about the Sanchez family's tax returns. What we do know is that this peaceful setup gets interrupted when a portal opens in Rick's garage. Not a natural phenomenon, not an accident. A deliberate portal opened by someone who knows exactly where and when to find him. And through that portal steps another Rick. An older Rick, visibly more weathered, already carrying a portal gun, already deep into the interdimensional lifestyle. This is our first indication that the multiverse exists in this setting, that there are infinite realities with infinite versions of every person, and that at least some Ricks have figured out how to move between them. The alternate Rick, and we never get a designation for this one, the show keeps his identity deliberately ambiguous, immediately starts his pitch. He's not here to chat, he's here to recruit. He offers Rick Sanchez the formula for interdimensional travel, the secret that unlocks literally infinite realities. And he demonstrates. He shows the portal gun in action, opens windows to other dimensions, lets Rick see glimpses of what's out there. Other Earths, alien worlds, realities where the laws of physics are negotiable. All of it accessible with the right technology. It's the ultimate temptation for someone with Rick's mind. The promise that he doesn't have to be confined to one timeline, one set of physical laws, one limited existence. And this is where the alternate Rick clearly expects an easy yes. He's offering ultimate knowledge, unlimited power, infinite adventure. For a brain like Rick's, this should be irresistible. The alternate Rick probably does this regularly, travelling to different dimensions and bringing other Ricks into the fold, building whatever network of interdimensional scientists he's part of. Maybe this is early Council of Rick's recruitment. Maybe it's something else. The show never confirms his exact affiliation. But his whole demeanour suggests he's done this before. And it usually works, except Rick Sanchez says no, flat out refuses. And the reason he gives is simple and completely sincere. He wants to prioritise his family. He looks at infinite realities, at the chance to become something beyond human limitations, and he says he's happy with what he has. Diane and Beth are right there in the house. His actual life is good, and he doesn't want to trade it for infinite, hypothetical lives. This isn't a reluctant hero who needs convincing. This is a guy actively rejecting the call to adventure because he's already got what he wants. The alternate Rick does not take this well. You can see the frustration, the genuine confusion that another version of himself would turn this down. And this is interesting because it implies that most Ricks don't make this choice. Most Ricks, when offered the portal gun formula, say yes. The fact that this alternate Rick is surprised by the refusal suggests that a Rick who prioritizes family over science is genuinely unusual, maybe even unique. Which raises the question of what happened to all those other Rick's families. The ones who said yes, but We'll get to that, trust me. So the alternate Rick leaves. He steps back through his portal, presumably to go find a more cooperative Rick in some other dimension, and the portal closes. And for a moment, it seems like that's it, like Rick Sanchez just dodged the entire plot of the series by simply opting out. He made his choice, he chose family, he gets to stay in his normal life. Problem solved. Rick and his family sit down for a meal together. Diane has made something, Beth is there, everyone's happy. This is the life Rick chose. The garage is still full of interesting projects, his brain is still operating at genius level, but it's all in service of this small domestic, genuinely loving existence. And the show makes you sit with this for a moment, really absorb that this was real. This isn't a false memory, or a simulation, or a trick. This happened. Rick C-137 had this life, made this choice, and was completely at peace with it. The scene has this almost eerie calm to it, especially if you're watching it with knowledge of what Rick becomes later. There's no sarcasm here, no defensive humour, no emotional walls. Just a family eating together. Beth is talking about something, kid stuff, completely mundane. Diane is smiling. Rick is present, actually listening, engaged. It's such a stark contrast to every other version of Rick we see in the series that it barely looks like the same person. And technically, it isn't. This is Rick before the defining trauma, before the thing that turns him into the nihilistic, alcoholic, emotionally closed-off disaster we follow for 7 seasons. The show doesn't linger on the meal for long, but it gives us enough to understand the stakes. This isn't just about Rick losing people he was fond of. This is about the destruction of a genuinely healthy, functional, happy life. The kind of life that, based on what we see of other Ricks throughout the series, is apparently incredibly rare. Most Ricks are already divorced, already estranged from their families, already alone before they ever get into interdimensional travel. The fact that Rick C-137 had something different, something better, and then lost it, that's what makes his story the central tragedy of the entire show. And you have to understand, the refusal matters. The fact that Rick said no, that he actively chose family over infinite knowledge, that's not just character development, it's the narrative hinge everything else swings on. Because if Rick had said yes, if he'd taken the portal gun formula and left with the alternate Rick, then he'd just be another interdimensional scientist. Brilliant, sure, but not special. The thing that makes Rick C-137 different, the thing that eventually makes him the Rickest Rick, according to the show's own internal logic, starts here with the choice to stay. The portal opens and the other Rick steps through, and Rick C-137 doesn't even get a chance to speak before the guy tosses something into the garage and vanishes. Just drops it and leaves. It's a bomb, a genuine interdimensional explosive device, which is frankly a pretty cowardly move when you think about it. This Rick showed up, demonstrated that he had the technology to travel between dimensions, offered to share it, got rejected, and then instead of just leaving and enjoying his infinite multiverse of possibilities, he decided to commit murder. The pettiness is almost impressive. The bomb detonates. The entire house goes up. We see it from Rick's perspective in the memory, the flash of light, the concussive force, the way the walls and ceiling just disintegrate outward. The garage, the kitchen, the living room where Diane and Beth were standing moments ago, all of it reduced to flaming wreckage in a fraction of a second. The blast is powerful enough to level the structure completely. This isn't some small explosive. This is a device designed by someone with a complete understanding of physics and chemistry, and probably a few sciences that don't have names yet, built specifically to cause maximum devastation. Rick survives, somehow. We see him crawling out of the rubble, covered in ash and burns and debris, and the first thing he does is look for them. He's calling their names, Diane, Beth. He's digging through the wreckage with his bare hands, throwing aside chunks of wall and shattered furniture. and you can see the exact moment he finds them, or what's left of them. The show doesn't linger on this, thankfully, but the implication is clear, and it's horrific. His wife and daughter were just standing in the house. They weren't even in the garage. They had no idea any of this was happening. Diane thought her husband was having a weird conversation with some stranger, and then she and her daughter were dead. Rick is consumed by grief and rage, which is probably the most human reaction possible to watching your family get vaporized by an interdimensional terrorist. This is the moment that defines everything that comes after. Every decision Rick C-137 makes for the rest of his life, every cynical comment, every drinking binge, every time he acts like nothing matters, it all traces back to this. He lost his entire family because he said no to science, because he wanted a normal life, because he thought being a good husband and father was more important than building portal guns and exploring infinity. And the multiverse punished him for it by sending a version of himself who made the opposite choice to murder everyone he loved. The grief doesn't last long, or rather it does, but it gets buried under the rage pretty quickly. Rick dedicates his entire life to revenge. Not just his immediate future, his entire existence from this point forward becomes about finding the Rick who did this and killing him. This isn't a healthy coping mechanism. This is obsession on a level that most people can't even conceptualize. He's not interested in rebuilding, not interested in therapy or healing or moving on. He wants blood. He wants to find the Rick responsible and make him pay, and nothing else matters. So he gets to work. Rick begins developing his own interdimensional travel technology, which is a pretty tall order when you consider he just rejected it 5 minutes ago because he didn't think it was important. But grief and rage are powerful motivators, and Rick is already the smartest man in his universe. He just needs to figure out what the other Rick already knew. He starts with the basics, the theoretical framework for interdimensional travel. The math alone is probably incomprehensible to anyone else on his Earth. He's working with concepts that won't be discovered by mainstream science for centuries, if ever. Quantum mechanics, string theory, dimensional frequency mapping, all of it synthesized into a practical application. He's working in the ruins of his house, by the way. He doesn't leave. He just sets up a makeshift lab in what's left of the garage and starts building. There's a shot in the memory of him surrounded by equations and half-built devices, and you can see the burned outline of where his family died in the background. He's literally working at ground zero of the worst moment of his life, using it as motivation. It's deeply unhealthy and also probably very effective. Rick perfects the portal gun. We don't know exactly how long this takes. Could be months, could be years. The show doesn't specify, and honestly, time gets weird when you're dealing with a guy who's inventing interdimensional travel from scratch while running on grief and spite. But he does it. He builds a functional portal gun, a handheld device that can open stable wormholes to any dimension in the multiverse. The technology that the other Rick offered to just give him, he reverse engineers from memory and theoretical principles. This is like watching someone build a smartphone after seeing one for 30 seconds. The level of genius required is absurd, and the thing is, he's not doing this for science. He's not doing it because he's curious about the multiverse or wants to explore or thinks it would be cool. He's doing it because it's a tool for murder. The portal gun is a weapon to him at this point, a means to an end. It lets him search infinity for one specific Rick, and then presumably do something very unpleasant to that Rick when he finds him. Rick starts travelling the multiverse. He opens his first portal, steps through, and begins the hunt. And this is where the scope of his obsession becomes clear, because the multiverse is infinite. Literally infinite. There are infinite versions of Rick, infinite dimensions, infinite variations. Finding one specific Rick, the Rick who killed his family, is mathematically impossible. It's like searching for a specific grain of sand on an infinite beach. But Rick doesn't care. He's going to search anyway. He's going to check every dimension, interrogate every Rick, follow every lead until he finds the right one. We see flashes of this in the memory. Rick jumping from dimension to dimension, walking through portals into different versions of Earth, different versions of his garage, confronting different versions of himself. Some of these Ricks are friendly, some are hostile, some have families, some don't. Rick is cataloguing all of it, building a mental database of the multiverse, learning the patterns and variations. He's becoming an expert on infinity, all in service of revenge. His personality begins to harden during this period. The Rick who rejected the portal gun because he loved his family starts to disappear, replaced by the Rick we know from the show. The cynicism sets in. The drinking starts, probably as a way to cope with the fact that he's searching an infinite multiverse for a target he may never find. The emotional walls go up. He stops caring about the people he meets because they're not his people. They're just alternate versions, copies, iterations. His Diane is dead. His Beth is dead. Meeting other Dianes and other Beths just reminds him of what he lost. So he starts keeping his distance. This is also when Rick starts to understand the true nature of the multiverse, and it's not comforting. He's seeing infinite versions of himself, infinite versions of his family, infinite versions of his life. In some dimensions, he accepted the portal gun and his family lived. In some dimensions, he never met Diane. In some dimensions, Beth grows up and has kids and lives a full life. The multiverse is showing him every possibility except the one he wants, which is his family back. And that's making him bitter. The more he travels, the more he realizes that his loss is both cosmically significant to him and completely meaningless in the grand scheme of infinity. There are infinite Ricks who didn't lose their families. His tragedy is just one data point among infinite variations. That's a hard thing to accept when you're running on grief and revenge. Rick's original universe is abandoned. He doesn't go back. There's nothing there for him anymore. Just a burned out house and memories of people who are gone. He's a dimension hopper now. A nomad travelling through infinity with a portal gun and a vendetta. His home dimension, the one we're calling C137, even though that designation gets complicated later, becomes just another point on an infinite map. He's not from anywhere anymore. He's from everywhere and nowhere, and that's probably exactly how he wants it, because it means he doesn't have to think about what he lost. And somewhere in all of this, Rick is racking up a body count. We don't see most of it, but the implication is clear. He's hunting Ricks, and when he finds ones that might be involved or have information, he's not polite about it. This is the period where Rick becomes genuinely dangerous, where he goes from genius inventor to interdimensional threat. The Citadel of Ricks doesn't exist yet, we'll get to that. But the foundations are being laid. Rick C137 is making a name for himself across the multiverse, and it's not a good name. So Rick does what any genius would do when someone murders his family. He says no. The rogue Rick who just bombed his garage is standing there, portal gun in hand, offering him the secrets of interdimensional travel. The multiverse is right there, infinite realities, infinite possibilities, and Rick C137 looks at this guy who just turned his wife and daughter into a crater and goes, nope, which, honestly, is probably the last genuinely decent decision he ever makes, because everything after this moment is just a decades-long downward spiral into becoming exactly the kind of monster he's trying to hunt. And I do mean decades. We're talking about a revenge quest that spans an absolutely absurd amount of time before Rick ever shows up at his daughter's house in the main timeline. The show is deliberately vague about how long this takes, but based on how much Rick ages, how much technology he invents, and how thoroughly he becomes the most wanted man in the galaxy. We're looking at somewhere between 20 and 40 years of this guy just tearing through reality like a lawnmower through a field of identical Ricks. First thing he does is invent his own portal gun. From scratch, with no help. The rogue Rick showed him it was possible, and then immediately left. So Rick has to reverse engineer the entire concept of interdimensional travel, using nothing but grief, spite, and apparently whatever equipment he can scrounge up in his bombed-out garage. And he does it. We see him in his workshop, surrounded by failed prototypes and equations, looking progressively more unhinged, until finally he cracks it. The portal gun, the thing that defines Rick Sanchez as a character, the device that makes the entire show possible, was invented by a man whose only goal was to find someone and kill them. It's a murder weapon that happens to also be the greatest scientific achievement in the multiverse. Then he just leaves. He opens a portal and steps into the multiverse and doesn't look back, because there's nothing left to look back at. His Earth, his dimension, the place where Diane and Beth existed, it's just a tomb now. So Rick starts jumping from reality to reality, searching for the Rick who killed his family. And this is where things get complicated, because there are a lot of Ricks. The central finite curve, which we'll get to properly in a minute, doesn't exist yet. Rick hasn't built it. So when he's portal gunning through dimensions, he's not just finding realities where Rick is the smartest man in the universe. He's finding realities where Rick is a farmer, or a teacher, or dead, or never born, or a version of himself that made completely different choices. But he's also finding Ricks who did accept the offer, Ricks who took the portal gun technology from the rogue Rick and started using it, Ricks who are out there doing science, having adventures, living the life that was offered to CE-137 right before his family exploded. And Rick kills a lot of them. Not all of them. He's looking for one specific Rick, the one with the scar or the particular portal gun design, or whatever identifying feature he managed to memorize in the 3 seconds before the bomb went off. But in the process of searching, Rick C-137 becomes very, very good at violence. We see flashes of this in his memory. He's got a whole arsenal of weapons he's invented. Energy rifles, laser pistols, bombs, probably some kind of singularity grenade knowing him. He's fighting his way through dimensions, interrogating Ricks, following leads that go nowhere, and leaving a trail of bodies behind him. The show calls him the most wanted man in the galaxy at one point, and they're not exaggerating. Rick commits what are described as countless atrocities during this period. We don't get a full list because the show is more interested in the emotional arc than the war crimes, but we know he's destroying property, killing people who get in his way, and generally behaving like a terrorist with a portal gun. The Galactic Federation has a file on him that's probably thicker than a phone book. Multiple governments want him dead. He's not just searching for the rogue Rick, he's burning down anything that might be hiding him. And the thing is, Rick is good at this, terrifyingly good. He's always been smart, but now he's applying that intelligence to survival and combat in a way he never had to before. He learns how to fight, really fight, against aliens and robots and other versions of himself. He learns how to think tactically, how to set traps, how to escape from impossible situations. Every close call makes him sharper. Every failure makes him more dangerous. By the time this rampage is over, Rick C-137 is going to be one of the most formidable individuals in the multiverse, and it's entirely because he spent decades being fueled by grief and rage. The technology he develops during this period is equally ridiculous. The portal gun is just the start. He builds his ship, the space cruiser, which can travel faster than light and has enough weapons to level a city. He invents his watch, the thing that lets him track his location across dimensions. He creates the technology that will eventually let him manipulate time, clone people, transfer consciousness, all the sci-fi nonsense that the show uses for plots later. Rick is learning by doing, and what he's doing is trying to hunt down one specific person across infinite realities, which requires solving basically every scientific problem simultaneously. But he never finds him. That's the kicker. Rick searches for decades, follows every lead, interrogates every Rick who might know something, and the rogue Rick is just gone. Either he's hiding in a dimension Rick can't find, or he's dead, or he's so far ahead that Rick can't catch up. We eventually learn that the rogue Rick is actually Rick Prime, and he's been actively avoiding Sile 37 this whole time, but Rick doesn't know that yet. All he knows is that his entire life has become about finding this person, and he's failing. So he starts drinking. Not socially, not casually, but the kind of drinking where you're using alcohol to chemically suppress the part of your brain that remembers why you're doing any of this. Rick's flask, the thing he carries in every episode, the thing that's practically attached to his hand, that starts here. It's a coping mechanism for trauma, which the show actually addresses directly in later seasons, but it begins during the rampage. He's hopping from dimension to dimension, finding nothing, killing people who probably don't deserve it, and washing it all down with whatever the multiverse equivalent of whiskey is. The nihilism sets in around the same time. Rick sees a lot of realities during his search. He sees versions of Earth where humanity went extinct, versions where they never evolved, versions where everything is slightly different but functionally the same, versions where his family's alive but he's not there to appreciate it, and after a while it all starts to blur together. Nothing matters because everything that can happen does happen somewhere. Every choice he makes, some other version of him makes the opposite choice. Every person he kills is alive in another dimension. The multiverse, the thing that was supposed to help him find justice, instead teaches him that justice is a meaningless concept in a reality with infinite variations. This is when Rick starts to really understand what the multiverse is. Not just a collection of dimensions, but a structure. There are patterns. Realities cluster around certain constants. And one of those constants, Rick starts to notice, is himself. In a lot of dimensions, Rick Sanchez is the smartest person alive. Not all dimensions, but enough that it's statistically weird. And the Ricks who accepted the portal gun technology, the ones who are out there using it, they're all starting to run into each other. So at some point, and the show is deliberately vague about when this happens, Rick helps form the Council of Ricks, or he forms it himself, or he's there at the beginning. The exact origin is contradictory depending on which episode you watch, but the basic idea is that Ricks across the multiverse decide they need some kind of organization, a governing body, a way to manage the fact that there are now thousands of Ricks with portal guns, hopping between dimensions and occasionally running into each other. And this is where Rick's characterization gets really interesting, because the Council of Ricks is everything Rick C-137 claims to hate. It's a government, it's bureaucracy. It's a bunch of Ricks who decided that instead of being independent loners, they'd form a committee and make rules. But Rick is there at the start, which means at some point during his revenge quest, he either saw the value in organising the Ricks, or he thought the Council could help him find the rogue Rick. Probably both. The Council establishes the Citadel, which we'll get to properly later, but for now, just know it's a space station where Ricks and Mortys live. They create a currency, a legal system, a whole society built around the idea that Ricks are the most important beings in the multiverse and should probably stop shooting each other on sight. They also, and this is important, start mapping dimensions, cataloguing realities, figuring out which universes are useful and which ones are dangerous. At some point during all this murder and dimension hopping, Rick does something that honestly makes the rest of his story make a lot more sense. And by make sense, I mean it explains why the show can contradict itself and still technically be canon. He founds the Citadel of Ricks. And I need to be clear here, this is the same Rick C-137, who just spent years, maybe decades, refusing to join the Council of Ricks because he thought they were pathetic. He builds them a home base. The Citadel is this massive space station, looks like a sci-fi city got wrapped around a giant donut, and it becomes the central hub for thousands of Ricks and Mortys from across the multiverse. We see it in its full glory later, complete with a class system where Ricks who work menial jobs live in slums, and the Council Ricks live in towers, because of course the infinite versions of the smartest man in the universe would immediately recreate capitalism and income inequality. The Citadel has its own economy, its own police force, its own everything. It's essentially a nation-state, except the only citizens are variations of the same two people. Now, why would Rick C-137 help build this thing if he hated the Council? Best guess, and the show kind of implies this. He needed their resources. He needed access to every Rick's intelligence, every dimension's data, every possible lead on his family's killer. You don't search infinite realities alone. You need infrastructure. So he gives them their precious Citadel. He helps establish the bureaucracy, and in exchange he gets access to the largest database of interdimensional information ever created. But here's where it gets truly bonkers. Rick doesn't just build them a clubhouse. He builds a prison. For everyone else, he creates something called the central finite curve. And this is one of those concepts that sounds like technobabble until you actually think about it for 5 seconds and realize how absolutely insane it is. The central finite curve is a dimensional wall that separates a finite subset of infinity from the rest of infinity. Specifically, it walls off only those universes where Rick Sanchez is the smartest being in that universe. Every reality where someone is smarter than Rick, where Rick is average, where Rick doesn't exist, where intelligence is measured differently, whatever. Those realities are on the other side of the wall. Inaccessible, the curve essentially turns true infinity into a curated infinity, a controlled set of dimensions where Rick is always on top. Think about the implications here. Rick literally redefined what infinite universes means for everyone inside the curve. Every other Rick, every Morty, every person living in those realities exists in a subset of existence specifically chosen to ensure Rick's superiority. It's the ultimate narcissistic architecture. And the kicker? Most Ricks inside the curve don't even know it exists. They think they have access to all of infinity. They think their intelligence is objectively supreme. They have no idea they're living in a gated community. The show reveals this in season 5, and when it does, it recontextualizes literally everything. Every universe we've visited, every adventure, every version of every character, they've all been inside this curve. We've been watching a show about infinite universes that takes place in a very finite, very controlled subset of infinity. It's like finding out your open-world video game has invisible walls everywhere, and you just never walked far enough to hit them. So Rick builds the curve, probably with the help of other Ricks who thought it was a great idea to never have to meet anyone smarter than themselves. And for a while, he presumably uses the Citadel's resources to continue his search. But then, because Rick cannot help but be Rick, he abandons the council entirely, just walks away. The show makes it pretty clear that he found their bureaucracy stifling, their rules pointless, their whole society a grotesque parody of the kind of structure he spent his life rejecting. These Ricks, these infinite versions of himself, they took their genius and used it to create middle management. They made committees, they have parliamentary procedure. There's a scene later where we see the council in session, and they're literally just doing boring administrative work, signing off on permits, discussing zoning regulations for the Citadel. It's the DMV, but everyone's the smartest man in the universe. Rick C-137 looks at this and goes, "Yeah, no, I'm out." So he leaves, and he goes back to what he does best, which is causing problems. The rampage continues. He's still searching, still destroying, still making enemies everywhere he goes. The show doesn't give us a comprehensive list of every atrocity, probably because the writers didn't want to make Rick completely irredeemable, but we get hints. We know he's been to dozens of planets, hundreds of dimensions, maybe thousands. We know he's left a trail of destruction. Later episodes reference that thing you did on planet Squanch, or the incident with the Gromflamites, or whatever, and Rick just shrugs it off. These aren't adventures to him, they're Tuesday. And speaking of the Gromflamites, this is when Rick's ongoing feud with the Galactic Federation really heats up. The Federation is this massive interstellar government that controls a huge chunk of the galaxy, very bureaucratic, very authoritarian, thinks it's bringing order and civilization to primitive worlds, but mostly just strip mines planets, and enforces conformity. They're the ultimate representation of everything Rick hates: structure and authority and rules. And he's been thumbing his nose at them for years. They want him captured. They want his portal technology. They want to dissect his brain and figure out how he does what he does. He consistently evades them. Not just evades, humiliates them. There are multiple references to Rick embarrassing Federation forces, destroying their ships, freeing their prisoners, just generally being a massive thorn in their side. The Federation's most wanted list probably has Rick's face on it in like 6 different art styles. He becomes this legendary figure, this boogeyman that parents tell their kids about. Behave or Rick Sanchez will portal into your room and turn you into a pickle. I don't know, I'm speculating, but the point is his reputation grows. He's feared, he's famous. Every government, every criminal organization, every cosmic entity with a grudge, they all know the name Rick Sanchez. And he doesn't care. Or he cares too much. It's hard to tell with Rick. But here's the thing, and this is where the tragedy really sets in. At some point, after all the searching, after all the violence, after interrogating every lead and chasing every rumor and probably killing a lot of people who maybe didn't deserve it, Rick gives up. He just stops. He accepts that he's never going to find his family's killer. Maybe he actually did find him. The show's deliberately vague about this, but whether he got his revenge or not, the end result is the same. The quest is over. The purpose that drove him for decades, that turned him from a scientist into a weapon, it's gone. And what's left is just a man with a portal gun and no idea what to do with it. So he settles into a life of aimless adventure. No goal, no mission, just using his portal gun for personal gratification. He's drinking heavily by this point, that much is clear. He's probably experimenting with every drug in the multiverse. He's having adventures, sure, but they're empty. He's going through the motions. This is the Rick we see in the pilot episode. Basically, the one who's already dead inside, but still moving. He starts creating things just to create them. New life forms, new technologies, new realities, not because he has a specific goal, but because he can. Because what else is he going to do? He makes sentient butter-passing robots. He makes universes inside batteries to power his car. He makes, and this is canonical, an entire miniverse inside a microverse inside a teenyverse, just to avoid paying for a car battery. The man's genius has no direction anymore. It's just chaos. And then, after who knows how long, after years or decades of this empty existence, Rick makes a decision. He's going to go back. Not to his own Beth, his own family, they're dead, they've been dead, but to a Beth, a different Beth, an adult Beth, who grew up without him, who has her own family now, who has a husband and kids, and a normal life. He arrives in what we later learn is Dimension C-137, or actually wait, no, this is where it gets confusing. Rick is from C-137, but the family he moves in with, they're not. They're from a different dimension, the show reveals this later, but everyone calls Rick C-137, so we call the family that too, even though technically they're not. The show does this on purpose to mess with us, I'm convinced. Anyway, Rick shows up at this Beth's house. His adult daughter who doesn't know him, who has every reason to slam the door in his face, and for some reason, she lets him in. So after decades of hunting the Rick who murdered his family, and finding absolutely nothing, Rick C-137 just stops. He gives up. And roughly 14 years before what we'll call Season 1, he shows up at the doorstep of a Beth Smith, who is not technically his daughter, because his actual daughter is dead and has been dead for decades, and he moves into her garage, which is, and I cannot stress this enough, completely insane behaviour that the show just presents as the starting condition. Now here's where it gets complicated, and trust me when I say the writers did not make this easy to piece together. Rick C-137 has been dimension hopping for so long that he's lost track of his original reality. He's been to thousands of dimensions. He's killed dozens of alternate versions of himself. He's seen every possible variation of his family across the multiverse. And then he just picks one relatively normal dimension, walks up to a Beth who never knew him, and says, "Hey, I'm your dad, I'm moving in." The show never explicitly tells us why he chose this particular Beth, this particular Jerry, this particular version of his grandkids. Maybe he was tired. Maybe this dimension's Beth reminded him of his original daughter at the age she'd be if she'd lived. Maybe he threw a dart at a list. I genuinely have no idea, and I don't think the show wants us to know. The Beth he moves in with is married to Jerry Smith, a man Rick immediately and consistently despises, and they have 2 kids, Summer and Morty. Beth is a horse surgeon, which the show treats as both a legitimate career and also a step down from the human surgeon she wanted to be. Jerry works in advertising, though works might be generous. They live in suburban Seattle, and their marriage is already hanging on by a thread before Rick arrives. This will be important. Rick sets up his laboratory in their garage, and when I say laboratory, I mean he converts a normal suburban garage into a facility that contains technology capable of violating every law of physics we understand. He's got a portal gun that can access infinite realities. He's got a spaceship that runs on concentrated dark matter, or, in a pinch, a microverse battery that contains an entire civilization generating power without knowing they're slaves. He's got shelves full of alien weapons, serums that can turn people into monsters, and a box labelled time travel stuff that he explicitly refuses to use because, in his words, we don't do time travel, we did it once and it was a mess. The fact that a normal family just accepts that Grandpa has a sci-fi nightmare factory in their garage is treated as completely normal within about a week. And then Rick starts taking Morty on adventures. Not Summer, initially. Morty. Morty, who at this point is 14 years old, gets C- grades in school, and has crippling anxiety about talking to girls. Rick shows up after being absent for Beth's entire childhood, and within days he's dragging his grandson across the universe into situations that would make a hardened soldier need therapy. The show wants you to think this is random, but it's not. Rick specifically needs Morty. Not because he loves him, or not only because he loves him, but because Morty's brainwaves are a perfect match for cancelling out Rick's genius brainwaves. Ricks are hunted across the multiverse by the Citadel of Ricks and the Galactic Federation, and a Rick's genius brainwaves are apparently detectable from space. But a Morty's brainwaves, which the show describes as a perfect frequency match but inverted, completely mask a Rick's signature. So Rick needs Morty as a cloaking device. He needs his grandson's stupidity to hide his intelligence. This is stated explicitly in the show, and it recontextualizes every single adventure they go on. Every time Rick says, "Come on, Morty, it'll be fun, Morty, just a quick adventure," what he means is, I need you as a human shield against detection. The adventures start relatively small, if you can call anything Rick does small. He takes Morty to an alien planet to help him smuggle seeds through interdimensional customs. The seeds have to go way up inside Morty's rectum, Morty. Way up inside there, as far as they can go, because that's how Rick solves problems. He takes Morty to an alien arcade called Blitz and Chits, where Morty plays a simulation game called Roy that lets him live an entire human lifetime in a few minutes. He takes Morty to a planet where they buy a robot butler who tries to murder the family. He takes Morty to a dimension where everyone is a monster and they have to pretend to be monsters to survive. And Morty is traumatized, repeatedly. The show doesn't shy away from this. Morty sees things that break him. He watches Rick turn people into body horror nightmares. He sees alien species that shouldn't exist. He's forced to bury his own corpse from another dimension after he and Rick accidentally turn everyone in their original dimension into monsters and have to abandon that reality entirely. That happens, by the way. The Rick and Morty we follow aren't even from the dimension they're living in. They're from a dimension they destroyed and then just slid into a replacement dimension where that dimension's Rick and Morty had conveniently just died. They buried those bodies in the backyard and took their places, and nobody in the family knows except them. Morty has to bury his own dead body and then sit down for dinner and pretend everything is fine. He's 14. Rick uses Morty constantly, not just as a cloaking device, but as a distraction, a shield, a decoy, and occasionally as bait. When they're surrounded by aliens, Rick shoves Morty forward and runs. When they need to sneak past security, Rick makes Morty do it because they'll never suspect a kid. When a plan goes wrong, Rick blames Morty. When a plan goes right, Rick takes credit. And Morty just accepts this because what else is he going to do? He's 14, his grandfather is the smartest man in the universe, and every adventure ends with Rick telling him that he's special, that he's important, that they're a team. The portal gun becomes the signature technology of their adventures, and it's worth explaining how it works, or at least how the show presents it. The portal gun can open a rift to any dimension in the multiverse instantly. Rick just points it at a wall, pulls the trigger, and a green portal opens to wherever he's programmed it to go. Other dimensions, other planets, other timelines, other realities where shrimp are the dominant species, it doesn't matter. The portal gun is essentially a handheld plot device that lets Rick escape any situation, which means the show has to constantly find ways to take it away from him or break it to create actual stakes. But when it's working, Rick can just leave. Any conversation he doesn't like, any danger he doesn't want to face, any consequence he doesn't want to deal with. He just portals away, and he takes Morty with him, usually by grabbing his arm and yanking him through while Morty is mid-sentence. The bond that forms between them is deeply dysfunctional, but it's real. Rick clearly cares about Morty, even though he'd rather die than admit it directly. He protects Morty sometimes. He comes back for Morty when he could just leave him. He gets genuinely angry when other people hurt Morty, even though he hurts Morty himself constantly. And Morty, despite everything, loves his grandfather. He defends Rick to his parents. He lies to cover for Rick. He goes on adventures even when he's terrified because some part of him has started to believe that his life with Rick matters more than his life at school or with his family. This is where we see Rick's nihilism start to infect Morty. Rick's entire worldview is that nothing matters because infinite realities mean infinite versions of everyone. So no individual life or choice has meaning. If you die, there's another you. If you fail, there's a dimension where you succeeded. If you make a mistake, you can just jump to a dimension where you didn't. Rick has seen so much, lived so long, and lost so completely that he genuinely believes existence is meaningless. And he starts teaching this to Morty, not through speeches, but through experience. Every time they abandon a dimension, every time they replace themselves with dead versions from another reality, every time Rick shows Morty that there are infinite Mortys and infinite Ricks and infinite everyones, Morty's grip on the importance of his own life loosens a little bit. Meanwhile, back at the house, Rick's presence is destroying Beth and Jerry's marriage. This was probably inevitable. Jerry is, and I say this with all the affection the show clearly doesn't have for him, a weak man. He's insecure. He's unemployed or barely employed depending on the episode. and he's threatened by Rick in every possible way. Rick is everything Jerry isn't. Rick is confident, intelligent, capable, and completely dismissive of social norms. Jerry wants structure, approval, and validation. Rick thinks structure is a prison, approval is for idiots, and validation is something you give yourself by being better than everyone else. Beth is caught between them, and the show makes it very clear that she chooses Rick almost every time. Beth idolizes her father. He abandoned her as a child, and instead of resenting him, she's internalized the idea that she wasn't worth staying for. So when he comes back, she does everything she can to keep him around. She defends him to Jerry. She lets him take Morty out of school. She ignores the obvious danger he puts the family in, because having Rick back makes her feel like maybe she was worth something after all. It's devastating character work, hidden under a sci-fi comedy. Rick's influence on Morty grows stronger with every adventure. Morty starts to question his normal life. School seems pointless when you've seen alien civilizations. His crush on Jessica, the girl he's been obsessed with since before Rick arrived, starts to feel small compared to the scope of the multiverse. His parents' problems seem trivial when you've watched Rick negotiate with interdimensional terrorists. Morty is being groomed, essentially, not in a predatory sense, but in a psychological one, to see Rick's life as the only life worth living. And Rick relies on this. He needs Morty to be compliant. He needs Morty to follow him through portals without asking too many questions. He needs Morty to be just smart enough to help, but just dumb enough to not challenge him. So Rick gives Morty just enough validation to keep him hooked. He tells Morty he's his favourite grandson, which sounds sweet until you remember there are infinite Mortys. He tells Morty they're a team, but teams don't usually involve one member using the other as a living shield. He tells Morty that he's special, and Morty believes him, because what 14-year-old wouldn't want to believe their genius grandfather thinks they're special? The Smith household becomes a fundamentally different place. Summer feels ignored because all the attention goes to Morty and Rick. Jerry feels emasculated because Rick constantly undermines him. Beth feels torn between her husband and her father. And Morty feels like he's living two lives, the boring normal one at school and home, and the terrifying, exciting one with Rick. The show treats this as comedy, and it is funny, but it's also a pretty accurate depiction of what happens when someone with untreated trauma and godlike power moves into a suburban home and starts making everyone orbit around them. Rick's trauma, the murder of his wife and daughter, is never directly discussed during this period, but it's there in everything he does. His alcoholism, his cruelty, his refusal to connect with people, his insistence that nothing matters. These are all coping mechanisms for a man who lost everything and spent decades failing to get revenge. He's given up on finding his family's killer, but he hasn't processed the loss. So instead, he's found a replacement family, and he's determined to not care about them, except he does care. And that conflict is what drives his character through everything that comes next. Okay, so right off the bat, we're talking about a universe where a sentient cloud can fall in love with a human. And that's not even in the top 50 weirdest things that happen. I mean, we're dealing with a literal infinite number of realities here. So if you think you've seen it all, you're probably wrong. And trust me, I've seen a lot. Alright, so picking up from nothing really, because before this, it was just Rick C-137 doing whatever it is a super genius does when he's not actively destroying or saving universes. Probably inventing new ways to be miserable, I don't know. Anyway, around what we'll call the year 2013, give or take a few temporal shenanigans we haven't even gotten to yet, the man himself, Rick Sanchez, makes his grand re-entrance into the life of his daughter Beth. Now Rick isn't just a scientist, he's the scientist, the smartest being in, probably the multiverse, though he'd argue it's definitively the smartest. He's also, shall we say, a connoisseur of fine alcoholic beverages, which is a polite way of saying he's almost always 3 sheets to the wind, sometimes literally. He just sort of moves in. With Beth, her perpetually anxious husband, Jerry, and their 2 kids, Summer and Morty. No real explanation. No, hey, I'm back from my decades-long absence. Here's why. Just a casual squatting in the garage. And honestly, that sets the tone for pretty much everything that follows. Immediately, and I mean immediately, Rick decides his grandson, Morty Smith, is the perfect, pliable sidekick for his interdimensional escapades. Morty, bless his cotton socks, is just a 14-year-old kid, already riddled with the usual teenage anxieties, and now he's got his mad scientist grandpa dragging him through wormholes and alien dimensions. This isn't like, hey, let's go fishing. This is, hey, let's go to a dimension where the primary form of communication is screaming and everything wants to eat your face. Beth and Jerry naturally are a little less than thrilled about this. Their main concern, which, fair enough, is Rick's influence on Morty. They see Rick as this incredibly irresponsible, deeply cynical figure, and they're not wrong, but they also severely underestimate the sheer scope of the threats Rick is protecting them from, or, more often, dragging them into. It's a delicate balance of parental concern and existential dread, really. One of their very first jaunts, and a pretty pivotal one at that, involves a trip to Dimension 35C. Now, why Dimension 35C, you ask? Because it's home to the elusive megaseeds. These aren't just any seeds, mind you. These are the kind of seeds that, when lodged way up inside you, well, let's just say, a place you wouldn't normally store seeds, and then digested, temporarily boost your intelligence to superhuman levels. Rick needs them for reasons. Morty, being the designated mule, gets the honor of carrying them, which leads to a truly horrific, squirm-inducing scene where he's basically drooling and babbling like a genius-level infant. This whole incident, while grotesque, serves a couple of purposes. First, it shows us just how far Rick is willing to push Morty for his own ends. Second, it highlights the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the universe they inhabit. And third, it gives Morty a brief, terrifying taste of what it's like to be as smart as Rick, only to have it ripped away, leaving him even more confused than before. This whole megaseed debacle also introduces us to what quickly becomes the most iconic piece of tech in the entire franchise: Rick's portal gun. This isn't just some fancy laser pointer. This thing is the key to everything. It allows instant travel across dimensions, between planets, to different points in space. It's the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card, a narrative cheat code, and the source of about 90% of their problems, because Rick uses it with all the caution of a toddler with a loaded firearm. Without the portal gun, Rick is just a very smart, very drunk old man. With it, he's a god. A deeply flawed, emotionally stunted god, but a god nonetheless. It's the ultimate symbol of his power and his freedom. And it's also the reason Morty's innocence starts eroding faster than a sandcastle in a hurricane. Morty, bless his little heart, starts this whole journey as a relatively normal kid, a bit awkward, a bit naive. But Rick's nihilism, his constant exposure to unspeakable horrors, and the sheer casualness with which Rick treats life and death, well, it starts to wear on him. He sees entire civilizations wiped out. He witnesses atrocities he's forced to commit a few himself, and all the while, Rick is just shrugging it off with a, "Don't think about it, Morty." It's a masterclass in how to traumatize a child, really. Every adventure chips away a little piece of Morty, replacing it with a growing sense of cynicism and a disturbing familiarity with the grotesque. He goes from being horrified by alien guts to barely flinching at them in what feels like a blink of an eye. Speaking of alien guts, the Megaseed mission also involves a rather tense encounter with the Gromflamites. These guys are basically the intergalactic customs and border patrol, and they're not exactly known for their hospitality. Rick and Morty have to infiltrate their customs facility to smuggle the mega seeds, which, as you can imagine, goes about as smoothly as a porcupine trying to ice skate. It leads to a high-speed chase, a lot of laser fire, and more near-death experiences than Morty probably had hot meals that week. It's an early example of the kind of high-stakes, violent, and often morally ambiguous situations Rick routinely drags Morty into. And it's also where we get a glimpse of the wider galactic community, a place that is, to put it mildly, not particularly friendly to humans or, really, anyone who isn't a Gromflamite. Back on Earth, while Rick and Morty are off committing interdimensional felonies, Beth and Jerry are doing what they do best, exacerbating their already significant marital issues. Rick's presence in the house is like pouring gasoline on a dumpster fire. Jerry, ever the insecure, emotionally needy one, feels constantly undermined and belittled by Rick, which, to be fair, he usually is. Beth, on the other hand, is constantly seeking her father's approval, even as she resents his abandonment and his influence on her family. It's a toxic dynamic, and Rick, being Rick, often actively stirs the pot, finding Jerry's pathetic attempts at dominance endlessly amusing. Their arguments are frequent, often petty, but occasionally touch on genuinely deep-seated insecurities and resentments. It's a testament to their dysfunction that they manage to stay together, even partially, for as long as they do. Then there's the whole time moves at an accelerated rate thing. Rick, in his infinite wisdom, decides to take Morty to a world where time passes exponentially faster than in their own dimension. The idea is to, I don't know, get something done quickly, or maybe just mess around. The result, however, is that they inadvertently create entire advanced civilizations. And then those civilizations, because Rick and Morty are just there, start to worship them as gods. And then, because Rick and Morty are just there, they also inadvertently destroy those civilizations, or at least cause their downfall. It's a recurring theme, Rick's casual disregard for the consequences of his actions, even when those actions literally create and destroy entire societies. Morty naturally is horrified by this, but Rick just shrugs. They were going to do it eventually. It's another brick in the wall of Morty's rapidly crumbling innocence, and another notch on the ever-growing tally of Rick's cosmic oopsies. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Summer Smith, Morty's older sister, is feeling pretty left out. She's a typical teenager, obsessed with popularity and social standing, but she's also intelligent and observant. She sees Rick and Morty going off on these wild adventures and she feels neglected. She wants in on the action, wants to prove her worth, and most importantly, wants Rick's attention. Rick, being Rick, is mostly oblivious or dismissive of her. He sees her as less useful than Morty, which again is a running theme. Her attempts to gain his attention often backfire or lead to her getting dragged into some equally insane, often dangerous situation. It's a classic middle child syndrome, but with interdimensional travel and alien weaponry. She's trying to find her place in a family that's already completely bonkers, and her journey to become a more integral part of the dynamic is just beginning. And then, just when you think you've got a handle on the scope of things, the show throws a curveball. The Council of Ricks. This is a big one. It turns out Rick C-137 isn't the only Rick. There are Ricks from countless other dimensions, all of them brilliant, all of them cynical, and all of them, for the most part, completely identical. The Council of Ricks is basically their governing body, a bureaucratic nightmare filled with infinite versions of the same guy. They view Rick C-137 as a renegade, an outlier, someone who doesn't play by their rules. Which, again, fair enough. Our Rick, the Rick we're following, is a bit of a loose cannon. even by Rick's standards. This introduction immediately expands the universe exponentially, showing us that Rick's particular brand of genius and nihilism isn't unique, but rather a universal constant across the multiverse. It also hints at a deeper, more complex history for Rick, one that involves a lot more Ricks than we initially thought. And it sets up a dynamic where our Rick is constantly at odds with his own kind. Because, well, he's Rick. He hates authority, especially when that authority is just a bunch of other him. It's like a cosmic family reunion from hell, and we're just getting started. And that's when things get, shall we say, complicated. See, Rick and Morty, in their infinite wisdom, decide to fix this little problem of everyone being madly in love with Morty by whipping up a serum. Great plan, right? Except, because this is Rick, the serum promptly backfires spectacularly. Instead of making everyone not love Morty, it turns them all into these grotesque, mutated monsters. Think David Cronenberg directed a Pixar movie. It's truly a sight to behold, and not in a good way. This is the moment, the precise moment, that their original dimension, the one they started in, dimension C-137, becomes completely uninhabitable. It's now the Cronenberg dimension, a festering cesspool of flesh monsters, and it's all their fault. Now, most people would probably, try to fix that, or at least feel a little bad about it. But Rick's solution is far more pragmatic and honestly, terrifyingly casual. They just bail. They jump ship. They find a new dimension, one where the Rick and Morty of that dimension, have just died. Convenient, right? It's like finding a perfectly good apartment where the previous tenants just spontaneously combusted. All the furniture is still there, the fridge is stocked, and nobody's going to ask any awkward questions. So they slide right in, seamlessly replacing their recently deceased counterparts. And this is where we get to one of the most genuinely disturbing, character-defining moments of the entire series. Rick, with a shovel and a deadpan expression, instructs Morty to help him bury their own alternate selves in the backyard. Imagine that for a second. You're a teenager, already deeply messed up by your grandfather's antics, and now you're literally burying a version of yourself. A version of you that lived, breathed, had hopes and dreams, and then just died. And you're putting him in the ground. Morty, understandably, is traumatized. This isn't just a quirky adventure anymore. This is a visceral, undeniable assault on his innocence. He's forced to confront his own mortality, his own replaceability, in the most literal and gruesome way possible. It's a foundational moment for his character arc, cementing his growing cynicism and the deep, often unspoken, psychological damage Rick inflicts. He's no longer just a kid along for the ride. He's a participant in his own existential horror. Anyway, they settle into this new dimension, which for clarity's sake, we'll call their C-137 from now on, even though it's not their original C-137. The nomenclature is a nightmare, I know. Just try to keep up. So life goes on. Or at least Rick and Morty continue their interdimensional escapades. At some point, Rick decides it's a good idea to revisit an old flame. Not just any old flame, mind you, but a sentient hive mind entity named Unity. Unity is, well, she's a planet-spanning consciousness that can assimilate entire populations, subsuming their individual minds into her collective. And she and Rick, they go way back, like, seriously, way back. It's revealed that Rick was deeply in love with Unity, and the feeling was, at least for a time, mutual. Their reunion is a chaotic, drug-fueled romp across an entire civilization, with Rick indulging in all his worst impulses, completely losing himself in the intoxicating embrace of Unity's control. It's a rare glimpse into Rick's emotional vulnerability, his capacity for genuine affection, and also his profound self-destructiveness. He pushes Unity to her limits, and eventually She realizes that his presence is more damaging than beneficial. She leaves him, and Rick is left heartbroken, a raw, exposed nerve for a brief, fleeting moment. It's a stark reminder that beneath all the cynicism and scientific brilliance, there's a deeply wounded individual. Then, because life with Rick is never dull, they stumble upon a planet that hosts an annual purge. Yes, like that purge. A night where all crime is legal, and the inhabitants, a race of adorable teddy bear-like creatures called the Kroot, go absolutely feral, slaughtering each other. Rick, naturally, is all for it. Morty, on the other hand, is horrified. He tries to help a Kroot named Arthricia, who is attempting to end the purge, but Rick discourages him, seeing it as a futile gesture. However, when Morty is betrayed and nearly killed, something snaps. He gets his hands on a power suit, and what follows is a shockingly violent display. Morty, pushed to his absolute limit, unleashes a torrent of pent-up rage, brutally massacring dozens, if not hundreds, of the Kroot. It's another pivotal moment for his character, revealing a dark, almost terrifying capacity for violence that lies dormant beneath his innocent exterior. It's a stark contrast to his earlier squeamishness, demonstrating how deeply Rick's influence and the constant exposure to extreme situations is changing him. He's no longer just a passenger. He's becoming a product of his environment, capable of truly awful things when provoked. And Rick, ever the detached observer, just watches, a flicker of something that might be pride, or perhaps just morbid curiosity in his eyes. We've seen Rick's casual disregard for life with the butter robot, his willingness to abandon entire dimensions, and his self-destructive tendencies with Unity. But with Morty's purge rampage, we see the ripple effect, the tangible cost of Rick's influence on the people around him. It's a truly unsettling development, and it sets the stage for a much darker, more morally ambiguous journey for both of them. And that, my friends, is just the beginning of their growth. Now you might be wondering, what about Jerry and Summer during all this? Well, they're mostly dealing with the fallout of Rick's return in their own, less interdimensional ways. Jerry is still Jerry, eternally insecure, trying to assert some semblance of authority in a house where he has none. Summer is trying to navigate her teenage years, grappling with the sudden chaotic presence of her grandfather, who often treats her with a mix of disdain and surprising, almost paternal affection. They're the anchors to reality, or at least a reality, in a show that constantly defies it. Their struggles are more grounded, more relatable, providing a necessary counterpoint to the cosmic absurdity that Rick and Morty constantly dive into. So we've had dimensions destroyed, alternate selves buried, hive minds romanced, and teenage massacres. And this is all just the first season. It's a lot, I know. It's like the writers decided to cram a lifetime of trauma into a few short episodes. And it works, because it immediately establishes the stakes, the tone, and the deeply messed up dynamic at the heart of the show. Morty is clearly not okay, and Rick is clearly not going to change. The question then becomes, how much more can Morty take? And what happens when he finally breaks? The show, as you can probably tell, likes to leave us with more questions than answers. For instance, what exactly is the Council of Ricksteal? Are they truly the smartest beings in the universe, or just a bunch of bureaucratic Ricks trying to impose order on a chaotic multiverse? And what about the original C-137? Is it just a Cronenberg wasteland? Or are there still survivors, perhaps even a version of Beth and Summer, struggling to get by? We genuinely have no idea. The show just moves on. It's both frustrating and brilliant, forcing you to fill in the blanks with your own imagination. Next time, we'll dive into the even more bewildering adventures of seasons 2 and 3, where things somehow manage to get even weirder. We'll explore the Citadel of Ricks in more detail, uncover the mysteries of the interdimensional cable, and maybe, just maybe, figure out what the heck a schmeckle actually is. For now, consider checking out the lore of the Venture Brotago's Gravity Falls, or perhaps even the surprisingly deep mythology of SpongeBob SquarePants. You might be surprised. So we left off with Rick, Morty and Summer essentially ditching their original dimension, leaving behind a ruined Earth and a pair of replacement versions of themselves. That's a pretty big step for a family dynamic. Just abandoning your universe like it's a rental car with a full tank. But that's just how Rick rolls, I guess. He's got infinite universes, what's one less? Anyway, as we move into what you might call the 2015 era, things start getting even weirder, if you can believe it. We're talking deeper dives into Rick's frankly baffling past and some truly spectacular family dysfunction. The first order of business, after the whole Cronenberg incident, is retrieving Jerry from a daycare. Not just a daycare, mind you, but a Jerry daycare in an alternate dimension, because apparently there are enough unwanted Jerrys across the multiverse to warrant a specialised interdimensional childcare service. I genuinely have no idea how that business model even works. Do they charge by the hour? Is there a multi-Jerry discount? The logistics are mind-boggling, but it's a place where Jerrys can be Jerrys, which mostly involves them being utterly pathetic and demanding. Rick, Morty and Summer have to navigate this labyrinthine facility, which is full of different Jerrys, all with varying levels of patheticness. It's like a museum of mediocrity. They eventually find their Jerry, because of course they do, and you'd think this would be a bonding experience, but no, it just reinforces everyone's low opinion of Jerry, including Jerry's own. It's a recurring theme, really, Jerry's consistent ability to be the absolute worst version of himself. This period also gives us a much closer look at the Council of Ricks, those bureaucratic, self-important versions of Rick that our Rick, C-137, absolutely despises. We first glimpsed them when Rick needed to reset his portal gun, but now we see them in their full infuriating glory. They're essentially a multiversal governing body composed entirely of Ricks, all convinced they're the smartest being in their respective universes, which, makes for a very productive and humble assembly. Their main goal is to protect the Ricks across the multiverse, which sounds noble until you realise it mostly involves maintaining their own power structure and dealing with rogue Ricks like C-137. Our Rick naturally has nothing but contempt for their rules and regulations. He sees them as a bunch of self-important paper pushers who have lost sight of what it means to be a true Rick, which in his mind is apparently being a nihilistic alcoholic genius who constantly endangers his family. The Council, in turn, views C-137 as a dangerous anomaly, an unpredictable element that threatens their carefully constructed order. This tension between our Rick and the Council is a massive undercurrent throughout the series, a constant reminder that Rick isn't just a lone wolf, but a lone wolf actively rejecting the pack. It also hints at a much deeper, darker past for Rick, one that involves a lot of violence and a distinct lack of caring about multiversal laws. Then, because nothing says family fun like an intergalactic wedding, the family attends the nuptials of Rick's best friend, Birdperson. This is a huge moment, because it's the first time we really get a glimpse into Rick's past as something other than just a mad scientist. Birdperson, a stoic avian humanoid alien, reveals that he and Rick were freedom fighters, battling against the Galactic Federation. This is a massive piece of lore, suggesting that Rick wasn't always just running around doing whatever he wanted. He actually fought for something, had a cause and had genuine friendships. It paints a picture of a younger, perhaps more idealistic Rick, which is almost impossible to reconcile with the Rick we know. The wedding itself is a chaotic affair, full of alien species and bizarre customs, but it's also a surprisingly emotional event, at least for Rick. He genuinely cares about Birdperson, which is a rare sight for our usually detached protagonist. The whole thing is a surprisingly sweet, if incredibly weird, look at Rick's past relationships. And then, because this show absolutely loves to punch you in the gut, the wedding takes a hard left turn into absolute chaos. Tammy Guterman, Summer's seemingly normal high school friend and Birdperson's fiancé, is revealed to be a Galactic Federation agent. Not just any agent, but a deep cover operative whose sole purpose was to infiltrate Birdperson's life and expose his rebel connections. This betrayal is brutal. Birdperson, who had finally found happiness, is gunned down, and the wedding devolves into a massive bloody battle between the freedom fighters and the Federation. Rick naturally is at the forefront of the fight, unleashing all sorts of destructive gadgets. It's a shocking moment, not just for the violence, but for the emotional impact it has on Rick. He loses his best friend, again, to the very organization he despises. This event further solidifies Rick's hatred for the Federation and sets him on a path of direct confrontation. The scale of the battle is immense, showcasing the Federation's power and reach, and it puts the entire family in direct jeopardy, marking them as enemies of the state. This is not just a personal vendetta for Rick anymore, it's a full-blown war. In a classic Rick move to escape an assassin, Rick transforms himself and his entire family into tiny, microscopic versions of themselves. Because, running away is always better than facing your problems head-on, especially when you can do it at a cellular level. They end up inside a homeless man's body, which is just as gross and bizarre as it sounds. This entire adventure is a masterclass in body horror and absurdism. They have to navigate the man's internal organs, fight off various bacteria and viruses, and even deal with the man's own internal struggles, all while trying to avoid the assassin, who is still, somehow, trying to get them. It's a testament to Rick's ingenuity, I suppose, but also to his complete disregard for anyone's personal space, including his own family's. The whole experience is a gross claustrophobic nightmare, but it does highlight the lengths Rick will go to protect himself, and by extension, his family, even if it means subjecting them to the most disgusting scenarios imaginable. Rick, ever the doting, in his own twisted way, grandfather, decides to help Summer become popular at school. How does he do this? By creating a device, obviously. A device that, of course, goes horribly wrong and creates a sentient, murderous blob of toxic waste that tries to kill everyone. Because that's just how Rick's inventions work. They either save the universe or try to destroy it, with very little in between. The blob, which is essentially a physical manifestation of all the negative emotions and insecurities of the school, goes on a rampage, forcing Rick and Summer to team up to stop it. It's a classic, be careful what you wish for scenario, but with more goo and existential dread. This whole debacle is a prime example of Rick's tendency to solve problems with increasingly elaborate and dangerous technology, often making things infinitely worse before they get better. It also shows Summer's increasing capability to handle these insane situations, slowly becoming more like Rick than Morty, which, is a whole other problem for the family. Meanwhile, back on the home front, Beth and Jerry's marriage is, as usual, teetering on the brink of total collapse. This season really cranks up the volume on their marital strife. They argue constantly about their roles, their happiness, and Jerry's general uselessness. Beth feels trapped and unfulfilled, constantly questioning her choices and her relationship with Jerry. Jerry, in his typical fashion, is oblivious and self-pitying, often making things worse with his attempts to fix things. This ongoing conflict is a crucial part of the show's emotional core, reminding us that even with all the interdimensional travel and alien encounters, the domestic drama is still very much present and painful. It's a constant source of tension, and you can feel the cracks widening in their relationship, hinting at much bigger problems down the line. It's not just bickering anymore, it's a fundamental disagreement about their entire lives. Then we get introduced to Unity, an alien hive mind with whom Rick had a past romantic relationship. This is a huge revelation, showing us a side of Rick we rarely see, vulnerable, in love, and genuinely affected by another being. Unity is an incredibly powerful entity, capable of taking over entire planets and integrating all life forms into its collective consciousness. When Rick and Morty encounter her, she's in the process of taking over a planet, and Rick immediately falls back into old patterns, rekindling their relationship. This is a fascinating dynamic, because Unity represents everything Rick supposedly despises: conformity, control, and a lack of individuality. Yet he's drawn to her, perhaps because she's one of the few beings in the multiverse who can truly challenge him intellectually and emotionally. Their relationship is intense and destructive, a whirlwind of passion and self-sabotage. Rick struggles with his feelings for her, trying to control her, trying to understand her, and ultimately trying to keep her. But Unity, being a hive mind, has its own complex needs and desires, and she eventually realizes that Rick's chaotic influence is detrimental to her own existence. So Unity, in a heartbreaking turn of events, decides to leave Rick. She understands that their relationship, while intense, is ultimately unhealthy for both of them. This departure sends Rick into a deep, dark depression. We see him at his most vulnerable, contemplating suicide and genuinely struggling with the loss. It's a stark reminder that beneath all the cynicism and nihilism, Rick is still capable of feeling profound pain and loss. This episode is a gut punch, showing the true cost of Rick's lifestyle and his inability to maintain healthy relationships. Morty, in a rare moment of genuine compassion and maturity, has to step up and essentially save Rick from himself. It's a powerful moment that highlights the complex bond between them and the burden Morty carries. This emotional fallout from Unity's departure is a major turning point for Rick, showcasing his deep-seated issues and the profound loneliness that often accompanies his genius. In a moment that perfectly encapsulates Rick's nihilism, he and Morty visit a dimension where everything, and I mean everything, is on a cob. Houses are on cobs, cars are on cobs, people are on cobs. It's a completely absurd, visually unsettling, and utterly pointless dimension. Rick's reaction to this, and to the general absurdity of the multiverse, is one of profound indifference. He just shrugs, makes a sarcastic comment, and moves on. It's a small, seemingly insignificant adventure, but it perfectly illustrates Rick's worldview. The universe is vast, chaotic, and ultimately meaningless. So why bother caring? It's a darkly comedic moment that reinforces his cynical outlook and his ability to find humour in the most bizarre and existential scenarios. It's a quick reminder that no matter how emotional things get, Rick will always revert to his default setting of nothing matters. And as the season draws to a close, the consequences for the family's actions, particularly Rick's, become far more severe. The Galactic Federation, still reeling from the wedding massacre, and now fully aware of Rick's destructive capabilities, begins to actively hunt the family. This isn't just a casual pursuit, it's a full-scale intergalactic manhunt. Rick's status as an enemy of the state is solidified, and the family is now directly in the crosshairs of one of the most powerful organizations in the multiverse. This escalation raises the stakes considerably, moving beyond individual adventures to a larger overarching conflict that threatens their very existence. The comfortable, if chaotic, life they once knew is gone, replaced by a constant state of fear and evasion. This is a major turning point, pushing the family into a much more dangerous and unpredictable future. Anyway, so while Rick is doing his whole saving the universe from itself thing, often with Morty in tow, there's this ongoing, deeply dysfunctional undercurrent with the family back home. It's not all interdimensional escapades, Like, there's this time when Rick, Morty, and Summer have to break into one of the Galactic Federation's highest security prisons. And not just any prison, mind you, but one so secure it makes Alcatraz look like a kindergarten playpen. Their target? Birdperson, Rick's best friend, who, as we now know, had been captured by Tammy Guterman, the Federation agent who was secretly a Grumpflamite spy. This whole rescue mission is a masterclass in Rick's particular brand of chaotic brilliance, involving a lot of improvisation, some questionable ethics, and a healthy dose of collateral damage. And it's during this prison break that we get a truly disturbing glimpse into the sheer depravity that Rick considers Tuesday. His portal gun, the device that enables literally all of their adventures, is on the fritz. Why? Because it runs on a microverse battery. And what, pray tell, is a microverse battery? Oh, just a miniature universe that Rick created, then populated with intelligent life, and then enslaved, forcing them to generate electricity for his portal gun. It's a universe within a universe, all existing solely to power his gadgets. The inhabitants of this microverse, these poor, unsuspecting beings, eventually create their own, even smaller universe, a miniverse, to power their own civilization. Completely unaware, they are just a battery for a battery. And then those guys, the miniverse inhabitants, create a teeniverse, because the cycle of exploitation just has to continue, apparently. It's a nested doll of ethical nightmares, and Rick just shrugs it off like he's explaining how a toaster works. He's genuinely baffled why Morty even cares. This is just how things are for Rick. He's a god to these people, and he treats them with the casual disregard of someone flicking a light switch. The implications of this are, frankly, horrifying, and it really underscores the vast, unbridgeable chasm between Rick's worldview and pretty much everyone else's. Then, because the universe apparently has a twisted sense of humour, Rick and Morty encounter the Cromulons. These are giant, disembodied heads that float through space, demanding that planets produce a hit song or face utter annihilation. No pressure, right? Earth, naturally, is next on their cosmic playlist. The Cromulons, with their booming voices and existential threats, are just another Tuesday for Rick. But for Morty, it's a full-blown panic attack. It's a classic Rick and Morty setup. Absurd high stakes and completely dependent on Rick's ability to pull a solution out of thin air, or in this case, out of a giant, sentient musical instrument. This event, while played for laughs, is another reminder of the sheer, arbitrary power wielded by cosmic entities in this universe, and how utterly insignificant humanity is in the grand scheme of things. Later, in a moment that genuinely catches you off guard, Rick actually sacrifices himself to save Morty from a particularly nasty alien species. This isn't a fake-out either. He genuinely puts himself in mortal danger, taking the brunt of an attack that would have killed Morty. Now, Rick being Rick, he immediately downplays it, probably makes a cynical remark, and acts like it was just a tactical decision. But for a fleeting moment, we see it. A flash of genuine, unadulterated care for his grandson. It's a rare glimpse behind the cynical, nihilistic facade, a tiny crack in the armour that suggests there's something more to Rick than just self-preservation and scientific curiosity. It's not enough to make him a good person, by any stretch of the imagination, but it's enough to keep Morty coming back, to keep the audience invested, and to prevent Rick from becoming a completely irredeemable monster. And speaking of weird planets, there's this one time they visit a planet where time moves at an incredibly accelerated rate, like hours for them or years for the inhabitants. They accidentally leave something on this planet, I forget what, and by the time they go back to retrieve it, an entire civilization has risen and fallen, all in what feels like a blink of an eye to Rick and Morty. This tiny, rapidly evolving society views Rick and Morty as gods, or at least as incredibly powerful, fleeting entities. It's another one of those moments that highlights the mind-bending scale of the universe and the casual disregard Rick has for the lives of others, even when those lives are lived at an accelerated pace. He's not malicious necessarily, just utterly detached. The implications of this are, again, pretty wild. Imagine living your entire life, building cities, developing technology, experiencing love and loss, all in the span of a few hours for a couple of interdimensional travelers who barely register your existence. But let's pivot to one of the most infamously disastrous events in the entire series, an event that truly cemented Rick's status as a chaotic neutral force of nature: the love potion incident. Morty, being a hormonal teenager, wants to impress a girl at school, Jessica. So naturally, he asks his super scientist grandpa to whip up a love potion. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Absolutely everything. Rick, in his infinite wisdom, creates a potion that's too effective, causing everyone who comes into contact with Morty to fall madly in love with him. This quickly spirals into a global catastrophe as the entire human population becomes obsessed with Morty. Rick's solution, naturally, involves genetically altering the population to make them unattractive to Morty, which, surprise, surprise, also goes horribly wrong. The result? The entire world is turned into hideous, mutated Cronenbergs. Think body horror, but on a global scale. The sheer unadulterated chaos of this event is a testament to Rick's genius and his utter lack of foresight when it comes to the consequences of his actions. It's a defining moment for Morty too, as he realizes the true extent of Rick's destructive capabilities. And what's Rick's solution to this global apocalypse? Not to fix it, no. He just finds another dimension where the Cronenberg apocalypse didn't happen, but where the Rick and Morty of that dimension did die, and they just move in. They bury their own dead bodies in the backyard and take over their lives. It's chilling, pragmatic, and utterly devoid of remorse. This is the moment Morty truly understands that for Rick, universes are disposable. Now let's fast forward a bit. Remember Birdperson, Rick's best friend? Well, he and Tammy, the Gromflemite spy, are getting married. And Rick, despite his usual cynicism, actually attends the wedding. This, of course, turns out to be a massive trap orchestrated by the Galactic Federation, with Tammy revealing her true identity and unleashing a full-scale assault on the wedding guests. It's a bloodbath, a betrayal of epic proportions, and Rick, despite his incredible abilities, is caught completely off guard. Birdperson is tragically killed, though we'll get to his eventual resurrection later. Don't worry, we'll get to that. Trust me. This event, the wedding massacre, is a pivotal moment. It's not just a personal loss for Rick, but a massive blow to his anarchist lifestyle. The Federation, his sworn enemy, has finally cornered him. And this brings us to one of the most surprising and, frankly, un-Rick-like decisions he makes. After the wedding disaster, with the Galactic Federation hot on his trail, Rick realizes his family is in danger. They're being hunted simply by association with him. And in a move that genuinely shocks everyone, including himself probably, Rick turns himself in to the Galactic Federation. He sacrifices his freedom, his autonomy, everything he holds dear to protect his family. He allows himself to be captured, to be imprisoned, all so they can live a life free from the Federation's relentless pursuit. It's a moment of genuine selfless sacrifice, a stark contrast to his usual self-serving behaviour. It's a powerful statement about his underlying, if deeply buried, affection for his family. He's not doing it because he wants to, he's doing it because he has to. He's a prisoner, but he's also a hero in his own twisted way. The immediate consequence of Rick's capture is the Galactic Federation's occupation of Earth. They integrate our planet into their vast intergalactic empire. Suddenly, Earth is just another cog in the Federation machine, complete with alien bureaucrats, new laws, and a completely altered way of life. The planet is federated, as they say, which means a lot of things for humanity. For one, the economy changes drastically. Money becomes worthless, replaced by a universal credit system. Unemployment skyrockets because who needs human labour when you have advanced alien technology? It's a dystopian future, but one that's presented with a darkly comedic edge. The mundane struggles of everyday life are now juxtaposed with the absurdity of alien overlords. And this brings us to the domestic front, the ever-present, simmering conflict within the Smith family. With Rick gone and Earth under Federation rule, Beth and Jerry's marriage, which was already on life support, reaches a critical breaking point. Jerry, bless his cotton socks, struggles immensely with unemployment. He's always been a bit of a loser, a bit of a whiner, but now with no job, no purpose, and the entire planet under alien management, he's even more pathetic. Beth, on the other hand, resents his helplessness, his inability to adapt, his constant complaining. She's a strong, capable woman, a successful horse surgeon, which is a thing apparently, and Jerry's weakness grates on her. Their relationship, already strained by years of resentment and unfulfilled expectations, completely unravels. The Federation occupation, while a massive global event, serves as a catalyst for the personal implosion of their marriage. It's a bleak, but very real depiction of how external pressures can exacerbate internal conflicts. And honestly, watching Jerry try to navigate a world where he's even less useful than before is just painful. He's a walking, talking embodiment of cosmic insignificance, and he doesn't even realize it. So we've got Rick in prison, Earth under alien rule, and Beth and Jerry's marriage circling the drain. It's a pretty low point for everyone involved. But as we'll see, things are about to get even wilder, because when Rick Sanchez is involved, rock bottom is just a suggestion. We've seen Rick's capacity for destruction, his casual disregard for life, and his occasional flashes of genuine affection. But what happens when the universe tries to contain him? What happens when the ultimate anarchist is locked up? And how exactly does one escape a maximum security intergalactic prison when you're the most wanted man in the galaxy? Also, what's the deal with the Council of Ricks? How many Ricks are there really? And what about evil Morty? Is he just a one-off villain, or is there something more sinister at play? Next time, we'll dive into the terrifying implications of the multiverse, explore the origins of the Council of Ricks, and maybe, just maybe, figure out what a schmeckle is. In the meantime, you might want to check out the lore of Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, or even Star Wars, The Clone Wars. Just a thought. So last we left off, Rick had just pulled the ultimate dad move, sacrificing himself to the Galactic Federation to save his family, and also, to avoid being arrested for all the other things he'd done, which, let's be real, is a list probably longer than a CVS receipt. Anyway, it's 2017 now, and the Federation, those bug-eyed bureaucrats, they're not wasting any time. They immediately swoop in and take over Earth, like full-on occupation. They replace all the existing governments, dissolve all the national borders, and just install their own incredibly boring, incredibly efficient, and incredibly invasive bureaucracy. Imagine if the DMV ran the entire planet, but with more tentacles and less smiling. Actually, probably the same amount of smiling, which is to say, none. They introduce their own currency too, because of course they do. It's called the Flurbo, which sounds like something a toddler would name their imaginary friend. But this Flurbo, it's the new global standard. Everything runs on it. Your job, your food, your rent, all paid in Flurbos. And you know who loves this new, highly structured, utterly soul-crushing system? Jerry. Because of course Jerry does. He's the kind of guy who thrives on being told exactly what to do, even if it's by an alien squid man. He actually manages to get a job working for the Federation. I don't know what he does exactly. Probably something involving paperwork and staplers. Or maybe he's just there to make the actual Federation employees feel better about their own life choices. He's probably the guy who explains the Flurbo exchange rate to confused humans. Or maybe he's just a glorified greeter. Either way, he's happy. Jerry is, inexplicably, thriving under alien occupation, which honestly says more about Jerry than it does about the Galactic Federation. Meanwhile, Rick is in prison, a high-security, maximum containment facility, which, considering who Rick is, seems like a pretty good idea. You don't just leave a guy who can build a portal gun out of a toilet paper roll and a broken toaster oven lying around. But Summer and Morty, bless their little hearts, they're not having any of this. They decide they're going to rescue him. Because that's what you do when your grandpa's a universe-hopping super genius who's locked up by an intergalactic government. You break him out, obviously. So they hatch a plan. It involves going to a Federation base, pretending to be agents, and generally causing a ruckus. It's exactly as chaotic and ill-conceived as you'd expect from two teenagers trying to outsmart an entire galactic empire. They manage to get into the prison, but it's not exactly a smooth operation. There's a lot of running, a lot of screaming, and a lot of near-death experiences. Standard Tuesday for these two, really. They eventually find Rick, or at least they find what they think is Rick, because Rick, being Rick, has already started his own escape plan. He's not just sitting around twiddling his thumbs, waiting for his grandkids to bumble their way in. No, he's been busy. He transfers his consciousness, his entire mind, into the body of a Gromflemite. You know, one of those big, green, multi-eyed alien guys. Because why not? If you're going to escape prison, might as well do it in style. And by style, I mean by hijacking someone else's body and probably traumatizing them for life. He basically infiltrates the Federation from the inside, using his new Gromflemite body to move around undetected. He's like a super spy, but instead of a fancy suit, he's wearing an alien skin, which, when you think about it, is way more impressive, and also way more disturbing. His goal isn't just to escape, though. Oh no, Rick never does anything simple. His goal is to bring down the entire Galactic Federation. And how does he do that? By manipulating their economy. Because Rick understands that the true power of any empire isn't in its guns or its ships, but in its ability to print money and make everyone believe it has value. So he uses the Federation's own currency system, the Flurbo, against them. He basically floods the market with Flurbos, devaluing them to the point where they're practically worthless. Imagine if someone just started printing trillions of dollars and dumping them onto the global market. Instant economic collapse. That's what Rick does to the Federation. He weaponizes inflation. It's brilliant, it's petty, and it's exactly the kind of thing Rick would do. The economic collapse is swift and brutal. The entire Federation system, which relies so heavily on this unified currency, just implodes. Their control over Earth, which seemed so absolute just a short while ago, crumbles. Without a stable economy, their bureaucracy can't function, their military can't be paid, and their entire infrastructure just falls apart. The aliens pack up their bags, or their tentacles, or whatever they use, and they leave. Just like that. Earth is free again. Or at least as free as it ever is with Rick Sanchez around. And where does Rick go after orchestrating the downfall of an intergalactic empire? Straight back to the Smith household, of course. Because where else would he go? He just walks in as if nothing happened, as if he didn't just escape from prison and collapse an entire economic system. And who is absolutely thrilled to see him? Nobody, really. But who is absolutely dismayed to see him? Jerry. Because Jerry was actually doing okay under the Federation. He had a job, he had a purpose, he had something resembling stability, and now Rick is back, and all of that is gone. Jerry in his infinite Jerryness, is upset that Rick ruined his alien-mandated good time. This return, this whole ordeal, it's the final straw for Beth and Jerry. Their marriage, which was already held together by spit and duct tape, and the sheer inertia of two people who had been together for too long, finally snaps. They get a divorce. And it's messy. It's incredibly messy. Jerry moves out, and the family dynamic shifts dramatically. Morty and Summer are caught in the middle, as always. But this time it feels different. This isn't just another one of their parents' squabbles. This is a seismic shift. And here's the kicker. The truly Rick-level manipulative cherry on top of this whole disaster Sunday. Rick orchestrated the divorce. He flat out admits it. He says he did it to remove Jerry from the family dynamic, to get rid of him. Because Jerry, in Rick's eyes, is a burden, a drain, an unnecessary complication. Rick doesn't want Jerry around, so he manipulates the entire situation, from the Federation's collapse to Beth's fragile emotional state, to ensure that Jerry is out of the picture. It's a masterclass in emotional manipulation, and it highlights just how dark and selfish Rick can be. He's not just a genius, he's a sociopath, and he's not afraid to burn down everything around him to get what he wants. The running tally of Rick's questionable decisions just went up by 5 points. So Jerry's gone, Beth is reeling, Morty and Summer are trying to process all of this, and Rick is back in charge. And what does Rick do when faced with the emotional fallout of his actions? Does he try to mend fences? Does he apologize? Does he even acknowledge the pain he's caused? No, of course not. He turns himself into a pickle, literally. He avoids family therapy by transforming himself into a pickle because, in his words, he's Pickle Rick. And this isn't just a quirky little side adventure. Oh no. This is a full-blown, incredibly violent, and surprisingly brutal escapade. As a pickle, he falls into a sewer, builds himself a rudimentary exoskeleton out of rat parts, and then gets embroiled in a clandestine war between Russian agents and a super assassin named Jaguar. He's fighting, he's killing, he's building elaborate weaponry out of household objects, all while being a pickle. It's absurd, it's hilarious, and it's also a deeply disturbing look at Rick's inability to deal with his own emotions. He'd rather risk his life as a sentient pickle than sit in a room and talk about his feelings. That's Rick in a nutshell. Or, a pickle jar. He eventually makes it back to the therapy session, covered in blood and grime, and still somehow manages to avoid any real introspection. The therapist, understandably, is not impressed. This whole pickle incident, it just underscores Rick's fundamental brokenness, his refusal to engage with the human experience in any meaningful way. He's a god, but he's also a deeply, deeply messed up god. We'll get to more of the fallout from all this, trust me, because things only get more complicated after this. So with Rick out of prison and the Galactic Federation in shambles, you'd think things would settle down, right? No, not even a little bit, because remember how Rick said he was doing all this for the Szechuan sauce? Well, that was apparently a massive, elaborate lie, a classic Rick move to deflect from genuine emotional issues, which naturally Morty and Summer are not having. They confront him pretty directly about his constant avoidance of anything resembling family problems. Rick, being Rick, just kind of shrugs it off, but the seeds of discontent are very much sown. The kids are growing up, and they're starting to see through his shtick, which is, frankly, terrifying for Rick. It means he can't just bully his way out of every uncomfortable conversation anymore. He actually has to engage, or at least pretend to. Anyway, at some point, Rick and Morty decide to take a little trip to the Citadel of Ricks. Now, if you recall, the last time we saw this place, it was a smouldering ruin after Rick went on his whole rampage. But apparently, Ricks are really good at construction, or maybe they just have an infinite supply of interdimensional contractors. Because it's not just rebuilt, it's thriving. Like seriously, It's a fully functioning, bustling society. There are Rick convenience stores, Rick schools, Rick-themed everything. It's a testament to the sheer, unbridled ego of Ricks that they could rebuild something so quickly and make it even more Rick-centric. And, for a brief shining moment, it seems like a place where Mortys can actually find some kind of purpose, or at least not be constantly dragged into existential peril by their Ricks. They've even got a whole societal structure, with different castes of Ricks and Mortys. It's all very organised, which is inherently unsettling when you're talking about Ricks. This is where things get really wild because evil Morty makes his move. After a surprisingly democratic election, for Ricks anyway, which means it was probably rigged in some incredibly convoluted way, he gets himself elected president of the Citadel of Ricks. And he does it with this incredibly slick populist campaign promising to make the Citadel great again, or something equally vague and appealing to the masses. He plays on the resentment of the Mortys, the apathy of the Ricks, and just generally consolidates power with a chilling efficiency. You see him delivering these rousing speeches, manipulating the media, and generally acting like a supervillain who just happens to be wearing a suit and tie. It's genuinely unsettling because you know what he's capable of. And now he has an entire interdimensional society at his fingertips. The other Ricks, being Ricks, are mostly too busy with their own egos and schemes to really notice what's happening until it's too late. They just assume he's another eccentric Rick with a weird agenda, not a genuine threat to their collective existence, which again is classic Rick short-sightedness. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Beth is having a bit of an identity crisis. The whole divorce, Rick coming back, the general chaos of her life, it's all starting to weigh on her. She questions her own identity, her choices, and Rick's influence on her life. She feels unfulfilled, trapped in this suburban existence that she never really chose. It's a very relatable feeling, even if your dad isn't an interdimensional super scientist. She's grappling with the idea that maybe she's just a reflection of Rick, a shadow of his genius, and not her own person. She's a horse surgeon, which is a niche profession, and it's clear she's not entirely happy with it. She sees her kids growing up, making their own mistakes, and she's just there. It's a quiet internal struggle, but it's one of the most poignant storylines of the season. So being the caring father that he is, Rick offers Beth a choice. He can replace her with a clone. This clone would be indistinguishable from the original Beth, have all her memories, and basically continue her life on Earth, while the real Beth could go off and explore the universe, live out her wildest fantasies, free from all the mundane responsibilities. It's a truly messed up offer, but it's also, in a twisted way, a genuine attempt by Rick to make his daughter happy, or at least to make her less unhappy. He even gives her a device that would allow her to activate the clone, and then just leave. No goodbyes, no explanations, just poof, gone. The implications of this are, of course, absolutely staggering. What does it mean to be you if a clone can just step in and take your place? Is the original Beth even necessary? In the end, Beth decides not to know. She doesn't want to know if she's the clone or the original. She embraces the ambiguity, choosing to live her life without that definitive answer. It's a fascinating character choice because it means she's essentially choosing to live in a state of perpetual uncertainty, which is perhaps the most Rick-like thing she could do. She's rejecting the need for a clear-cut identity and instead just being. It's a powerful moment, and it really highlights the complex relationship between Rick and Beth. He offers her freedom, but that freedom comes with a heavy price, the potential loss of her own self. And she accepts that price, or at least she accepts the possibility of it. It's a very adult decision, and one that really shows how much she's grown, even if it's growth in a very strange direction. Meanwhile, Jerry, bless his cotton socks, is trying to move on. He attempts to date other people, including an alien warrior named Kiara. And, as you might expect, it doesn't go particularly well. Jerry is still Jerry, and his insecurities and general ineptitude tend to shine through in every romantic encounter. He's just not built for the fast-paced interdimensional dating scene. He tries to be cool, he tries to be suave, but he just ends up being Jerry. Kiara, being a warrior, is clearly out of his league, and their relationship is a hilarious disaster from start to finish. He just struggles to move on from Beth, which is, again, very Jerry. He's a creature of habit, and the disruption of his marriage has completely thrown him off kilter. He's trying, he really is, but he just can't seem to get out of his own way. Summer and Morty, for their part, are also dealing with the fallout of their parents' divorce and Rick's constant, disruptive presence. They're both getting older, and the cracks in their family unit are becoming more and more apparent. They're forced to confront the reality of their parents' separation and the fact that Rick isn't exactly a stabilizing influence. They're growing up in this incredibly chaotic environment, and it's clearly taking a toll on them. They're both trying to find their own identities, their own ways of coping with the madness, and it's not always easy. Summer often tries to emulate Rick seeking his approval, while Morty is just trying to survive. At some point, Rick and Morty have an adventure involving a device called Morty's Mind Blowers. This device, as the name suggests, allows Rick to extract and store traumatic or embarrassing memories from Morty's mind. And naturally, Morty stumbles upon it and starts watching all these memories, only to discover that Rick has been selectively wiping his mind of all sorts of terrible things. It's a truly disturbing revelation, highlighting the extent of Rick's manipulation and control over Morty. Morty is understandably furious, and it leads to a massive confrontation between the two of them. It's a really dark episode, because it shows just how much Rick has been messing with Morty's head, and how little respect he has for Morty's autonomy. It also reveals that Rick has his own mind blowers, suggesting he's just as messed up as Morty, if not more so. It's a fascinating look into the psychology of their relationship, and it really underscores the power imbalance between them. And then, to cap off this absolute mess of a season, the family, including Jerry, reunites for a brief, incredibly awkward Christmas dinner. It's exactly as uncomfortable as you'd imagine. Everyone is trying to be polite, but the tension is palpable. The divorce, the clone Beth situation, Jerry's dating misadventures, Rick's general disregard for everyone's feelings, it all hangs in the air like a thick, unbreathable fog. It highlights their fractured state perfectly. They're a family technically, but they're barely holding it together. It's a very realistic portrayal of a dysfunctional family trying to navigate a holiday gathering, just with more alien goo and existential dread. It's a painful reminder that even with all the interdimensional travel and scientific breakthroughs, some problems are just human. So what does it all mean for the future of the Smith-Sanchez family? Is Beth a clone? Does it even matter? What exactly is evil Morty's long-term plan for the Citadel? And will Jerry ever find true love, or at least a stable job? Next time, we could delve into the chaotic world of Adventure Time, the cosmic horrors of Gravity Falls, or perhaps the surprisingly deep lore of My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. So we left off with Rick having basically nuked the entire family dynamic from orbit, only to then put it back together in a way that, let's be honest, was probably worse. And if you thought things were going to calm down after that, well, you haven't been paying attention, because around 2019, the universe decided to throw even more chaos at our intrepid and increasingly dysfunctional duo. Rick and Morty, fresh off the heels of Rick's triumphant return to the family, but still very much reeling from the whole Galactic Federation, Jerry divorce, and general psychological warfare situation, immediately found themselves up against a fresh batch of cosmic entities and adversaries. It's almost like the universe itself was saying, "Oh, you thought that was bad. Hold my beer." we're talking about a whole new roster of threats that ranged from the genuinely terrifying to the utterly absurd, often within the same 5 minutes. One of the more unconventional gifts Rick bestows upon Morty during this period is the infamous death crystal. Now, you'd think a crystal that shows you all your potential deaths would be, I don't know, a cautionary tale, a philosophical tool for self-reflection. Not for Rick. For Rick, it's just another gadget to toss at Morty, probably to shut him up for a bit. But this isn't just any crystal. This is a crystal that, when held, projects a holographic display of every single possible way Morty could die, based on his current actions and choices. It's like a choose-your-own-adventure book, but every page ends in gruesome demise. And naturally, Morty being Morty immediately fixates on the one death that involves him dying old and happy with Jessica, his long-standing, unrequited crush. Because of course he does. This death crystal, this seemingly innocuous little trinket, becomes a surprisingly powerful catalyst for Morty's burgeoning self-assertion. For the first time, Morty has a tangible, albeit morbid, guide for his actions. He starts using the crystal to manipulate situations, to steer events towards that one desirable outcome. He's not just blindly following Rick anymore. He's actively making choices, albeit choices dictated by a glowing rock and the desperate hope of ending up with a girl who barely knows he exists. It's a subtle shift, but it's there. Morty, for all his anxieties and neuroses, is starting to push back, to try and carve out his own path, even if that path is paved with the spectres of his own demise. And what happens when Morty, a 14-year-old with a death crystal, starts trying to control his own destiny? Absolute, unmitigated chaos. His choices, guided by the crystal's visions, rapidly spiral into a nightmarish fascist reality. Because of course they do. Morty, in his single-minded pursuit of Jessica, makes a series of increasingly questionable decisions, each one leading him further down a dark path. He accidentally creates a society where everyone is constantly trying to kill themselves to achieve a good death, which is just chef's kiss for dark comedy. And then, because the universe loves to pile on, he accidentally mutates himself into a giant, grotesque version of his own body. A giant mutated fascist Morty. It's a real testament to how quickly things can go sideways when a teenager is given ultimate power and terrible guidance. The death crystal, instead of being a tool for good, becomes a mirror reflecting Morty's deepest, most selfish desires. And the consequences are, as always, catastrophic. This entire debacle culminates in Rick and Morty being forced to confront their past selves and the consequences of their actions in a dimension that is literally a story train. I genuinely have no idea how the writers came up with that one. It's a dimension where every car on a train represents a different story, and the occupants are forced to live out these narrative loops. It's a meta-commentary on storytelling itself, wrapped in a bizarre self-referential adventure. They encounter various Ricks and Mortys from alternate timelines, all trapped in these narrative loops, all dealing with the fallout of their own choices. It's a chaotic, confusing mess, but it serves as a stark reminder that their actions, even the seemingly small ones, have ripple effects across the multiverse. It also highlights the cyclical nature of their dysfunctional relationship, with past versions of themselves making the same mistakes over and over again. It's like a cosmic intervention, but instead of therapy, it's just more existential dread. Then, because Rick is nothing if not a master of deflection and problematic gift-giving, he decides Morty needs a dragon. Not a metaphor for a dragon, not a dragon-themed toy, but an actual, fire-breathing, sentient dragon. And because this is Rick and Morty, this dragon, named Balthromor, immediately forms a psychic bond with Morty. A soul bond, as it were, which naturally leads to a soul bond orgy. Because what else would happen when a teenager and a dragon form a deep, emotional connection in the Rick and Morty universe. It's a scene that's as uncomfortable as it is hilarious, and it perfectly encapsulates the show's willingness to push boundaries, even if those boundaries are made of pure, unadulterated squick. The whole thing is a thinly veiled allegory for sexual awakening and the complexities of emotional intimacy, all wrapped up in a package of interspecies psychic orgies. It's a lot. At some point, Rick and Morty visit a planet where time moves differently. This is a classic sci-fi trope, but naturally, Rick puts his own spin on it. On this planet, time flows at an accelerated rate, meaning that what feels like minutes to them is actually years for the inhabitants. Rick, ever the opportunist, uses this unique temporal anomaly to create a story-generating app. Because if you can churn out entire lifetimes in a few hours, why not churn out endless stories for profit? It's a brilliant, if morally questionable, idea. The app becomes incredibly popular, generating countless narratives and essentially creating an entire literary industry on Earth, all thanks to Rick exploiting a temporal anomaly on a distant planet. It's a prime example of Rick's genius and his complete disregard for the ethical implications of his inventions. He's not just a scientist, he's a cosmic capitalist, and he'll exploit anything for a quick buck, or in this case, a quick story. Meanwhile, Summer, who has largely been relegated to the role of the exasperated older sister, starts to step into her own during this period. Her role in the adventures becomes noticeably more prominent. She's not just a tag-along anymore. She's actively participating, often proving to be just as capable, if not more so, than Morty in certain situations. She's less prone to panic, more pragmatic, and generally more level-headed than either Rick or Morty, which honestly isn't saying much, but it's a definite improvement. She often accompanies Rick and Morty on their escapades, providing a much-needed dose of sanity, or at least a different flavour of insanity, to the proceedings. It's a welcome development, as Summer has always been a compelling character, and seeing her get more screen time and more agency is a definite plus. She's not just reacting to the chaos anymore, she's actively shaping it, or at least surviving it, with a remarkable degree of resilience. And speaking of family dynamics, the aftermath of Beth and Jerry's reconciliation is still very much a lingering cloud over the entire household. Remember that whole Jerry gets his family back thing? Well, it turns out putting a marriage back together after it's been systematically dismantled by a mad scientist isn't exactly a smooth process. There's a palpable tension and awkwardness that permeates every interaction. They're together, but they're not together. It's a fragile truce, constantly on the verge of shattering. Rick, of course, revels in this discomfort, occasionally prodding at their insecurities just for his own amusement. It's a constant reminder that even when things seem to be settling down, the underlying issues are still very much present, simmering beneath the surface, ready to boil over at any moment. The family's back under one roof, but the cracks are still very much visible, and in some cases widening. Then we have the infamous vat of acid scenario. This is a classic Rick and Morty high-concept episode that starts with Rick creating a device that allows them to reset their lives, essentially creating a save point in reality. Morty, being Morty, immediately misuses it, leading to a series of increasingly elaborate pranks on Rick. He pretends to jump into a vat of acid, knowing Rick will reset the timeline to save him, only to reveal it was all a ruse. It's a brilliant, if incredibly annoying way for Morty to assert some control over Rick. He's finally found a way to get under Rick's skin, to annoy him without actually putting himself in mortal danger, at least not permanently. The sheer audacity of Morty's pranks is a testament to his growing confidence, even if that confidence is entirely misplaced and fueled by a device that can undo all consequences. But, as with all things Morty, his vat of acid pranks escalate. What starts as a harmless, albeit irritating way to mess with Rick, quickly spirals out of control. He uses the reset button to undo social faux pas, to avoid awkward conversations, to basically live a consequence-free existence. And in doing so, he finally makes progress with Jessica. He builds a genuine connection with her, going on dates, having meaningful conversations, all while knowing he can just hit the reset button if he messes up. It's a dream come true for Morty, a chance to finally achieve his long-held romantic aspirations. But because this is Rick and Morty, and because Morty can't have nice things, Rick eventually gets fed up with the constant timeline resets. He confronts Morty, and in a fit of pique, reveals the truth about the reset button. It doesn't just reset Morty's life, it destroys the entire universe every time he uses it, creating a new one in its place. And then, to really drive the point home, Rick forces Morty to confront all the alternate versions of himself that he's created and abandoned, all the universes he's destroyed. It's a horrifying revelation, a stark reminder that even Morty's attempts at self-improvement often come at an astronomical cost. And in the process, he loses Jessica, all that progress, all those carefully constructed moments, erased in a single, devastating moment. It's a brutal lesson in consequences, and a reminder that even with a reset button, you can't escape the fallout of your actions. Okay, so after all that interdimensional cable nonsense and the absolute existential horror of the vat of acid, which, let's be honest, is a pretty high bar for existential horror in this particular universe, we roll into some truly bizarre character development. Like, I genuinely don't know if the writers were just having a field day, or if this was all meticulously planned from the jump, but it gets complicated. Rick, ever the master of self-sabotage, and also, apparently, self-indulgent theatricality, decides to counter a sentient AI known as the Heistatron. Now, the Heistatron, as its name subtly implies, is really good at heists. Like, really good. So good that Rick's solution isn't to, stop it, but to out-heist it. His grand plan involves creating a series of increasingly elaborate, self-sabotaging heists designed to be so convoluted and meta that they literally break the concept of a heist. It's Rick at his most Rick, which means it's brilliant and utterly insane. He's basically weaponizing narrative tropes against a robot that loves narrative tropes. And of course, Morty's dragged along for the ride, because that's just his lot in life. This whole escapade culminates in a heist so complex it involves multiple Ricks, multiple Mortys, and a bewildering array of double crosses that are then triple crossed and then probably quadruple crossed just for good measure. It's a dizzying display of meta commentary on storytelling itself. And frankly, I think the Heistatron just gave up from sheer narrative exhaustion. Then, because the universe apparently demands that Rick and Morty experience every possible genre trope, they end up on a planet where they're forced to participate in a story circle. This isn't some quaint little campfire gathering. Oh no. This is a literal, mandatory, life or death scenario where various alien species have to contribute to a collective narrative. And if your story isn't good enough, or if it doesn't fit the established parameters, well, let's just say the consequences are dire. It's like a cosmic improv class with incredibly high stakes. And naturally, Rick, with his inherent disdain for anything resembling genuine emotional expression or collaborative effort, absolutely despises it. Morty, on the other hand, tries to make the best of it, as he usually does, often to his detriment. The whole thing is a thinly veiled satire of Hollywood's obsession with formulaic storytelling, and it's both hilarious and deeply uncomfortable to watch. Rick, of course, finds a way to exploit the system, because he always does, usually by being the most disruptive and creatively destructive force in the room. He dismantles the very concept of the story circle from the inside out, proving once again that his greatest power isn't necessarily his scientific genius, but his ability to break any system he encounters. Meanwhile, back on Earth, or at least in the general vicinity of the Smith household, Beth is having a moment. A big one. She confronts Rick about his overprotective and controlling nature, which, let's be honest, has been simmering for seasons. This isn't just about him being a bad dad, it's about him actively stifling her individuality and her potential. She feels trapped, like a bird in a gilded cage that Rick himself built. This conversation is less a conversation and more an emotional explosion, a culmination of years of resentment and unaddressed trauma. It's raw, it's painful, and it's one of those rare moments where Rick is genuinely put on the spot and can't just bluster his way out of it with a portal gun or a sarcastic remark. He's actually forced to confront the emotional fallout of his actions, which, for Rick Sanchez, is practically a religious experience. And what does Rick do when confronted with emotional accountability? He offers Beth a choice that is, in typical Rick fashion, both incredibly generous and deeply manipulative. He tells her she can either stay on Earth, continue her life, and he'll make a clone of her to go out and be a space adventurer, living the life she always dreamed of. Or she can go herself, and he'll make a clone to stay on Earth. The catch, of course, is that he scrambles their memories, so neither of them knows which one is the original and which one is the clone. It's a truly diabolical move, designed to both give Beth what she wants and simultaneously remove any possibility of her truly knowing herself, thereby keeping her emotionally tethered to him. This is peak Rick solving a problem by creating an even bigger, more psychologically damaging problem. So, Space Beth is introduced, and she's everything Beth ever wanted to be. A badass, independent, intergalactic warrior. She's got her own ship, her own crew, and she's out there fighting galactic fascism and generally being awesome. But her existence immediately raises the central question. Is she the original Beth, or is the Beth who stayed on Earth the original? The show deliberately leaves this ambiguous, and it's a brilliant narrative device because it forces the audience and the characters to confront the nature of identity itself. If a clone has all your memories, all your experiences, all your personality, is it still you? Or is you tied to the original physical body? The family struggles with the implications of Space Beth's existence. Morty is, predictably, confused and slightly horrified. Summer tries to be supportive, but is also clearly weirded out. Jerry, in a rare moment of semi-lucidity, just wants to know which one he's married to, which is a fair question, I guess. And Rick, of course, pretends it's all part of his grand plan, a testament to his genius, while secretly, you can tell, he's just as messed up by it as everyone else. The constant ambiguity means that every interaction with either Beth is loaded with this underlying tension, this unspoken question of authenticity. It's a really clever way to add complexity to a character who, for a long time, was largely defined by her relationship to Rick. And speaking of things coming back to haunt Rick, remember Phoenix Person, Tammy's evil cyborg boyfriend? Well, he's back, and he's been rebuilt and reprogrammed by Tammy, who it turns out is still very much a major player in the Galactic Federation. This leads to a truly destructive confrontation, a massive, no-holds-barred battle between Rick and Phoenix Person. It's visually spectacular, full of high-stakes action, and genuinely feels like the culmination of a long-running storyline. This isn't just a random monster of the week. This is a deeply personal fight for Rick. Phoenix Person represents everything Rick hates about the Federation, everything he lost and everything he tried to forget. The battle is brutal, with both sides unleashing their full arsenals. It's a testament to Phoenix Person's power that he can even stand up to Rick, who, let's be honest, is basically a god in this universe. But in the chaos of this monumental battle, Tammy, the architect of so much pain and suffering for Rick and his family, finally meets her end. She's killed during the confrontation, a fittingly violent demise for a character who brought so much violence into their lives. Her reign of terror, which started with Birdperson's wedding and escalated into a full-blown galactic war, is finally over. It's a moment of grim satisfaction, but also a reminder of the high cost of Rick's lifestyle. Tammy's death closes a significant chapter in the overarching narrative, removing one of the most persistent and personal antagonists. It's not a triumphant victory, though, more like a weary end to a very long, very bloody conflict. And then, after all of that, after the Heistatron, the story circle, the Beth clone dilemma, and the brutal fight with Birdperson and Tammy, Rick is left alone. Truly alone. He's vulnerable, more so than we've seen him in a long time. He's forced to reflect on his relationships, on his choices, on the wreckage he leaves in his wake. The season ends with him in a surprisingly contemplative, almost melancholic state. He's won the battles, but at what cost? He's pushed away the people he cares about, created an identity crisis for his daughter, and faced down his own past. It's a stark reminder that for all his genius and power, Rick Sanchez is still a deeply flawed, deeply lonely individual. It sets the stage for a much more introspective Rick, or at least as introspective as Rick can get moving forward. He's been forced to look inward, and the view isn't pretty. So you've got to wonder, after all that, what is the deal with the two Beths? Does Rick actually know which one is which and he's just lying? Or did he genuinely scramble his own memory too? And what about Birdperson? Is he truly gone? Or is there some tiny sliver of Birdperson left in there, just waiting to be reactivated? And what was the Heistatron even doing before Rick got involved? Was it just heisting for the sake of heisting? I genuinely have no idea. Next time, we could dive into the cosmic horrors of Warhammer 40,000, the intricate political machinations of Dune, or perhaps the surprisingly deep lore of SpongeBob SquarePants. So picking up where we left off, after the whole Birdperson debacle and the vat of acid incident, we roll into what, for us, was 2021. And this is where things, well, they don't exactly slow down. If anything, the writers decided to just throw everything at the wall, including the entire kitchen sink, the plumbing, and possibly the foundation of the house itself. We start with Rick, for reasons I genuinely don't understand, having a self-proclaimed nemesis named Mr. Nimbus. Now, if you're thinking, is this a thinly veiled Aquaman parody? Then congratulations, you've nailed it. Mr. Nimbus is, apparently, the king of the ocean, controls the police, and also, I guess, has some kind of sexual history with Rick. It's never really explained. It's just there, a fact of the universe that we're all just supposed to accept. He shows up, demands a toast, and then immediately causes a confrontation because Rick, being Rick, can't just have a quiet afternoon. Nimbus is this flamboyant, almost effeminate character, completely at odds with Rick's usual stoic, cynical demeanour, which of course makes him the perfect foil. He's also the only being in the multiverse, apparently, who can make Rick genuinely uncomfortable, which is saying something given the cosmic horrors Rick routinely faces. The whole thing is a bizarre, chaotic mess, ending with Nimbus being, I guess, appeased, but not before we get a glimpse into Rick's deeply weird personal life. Meanwhile, Morty, bless his ever-suffering heart, is still trying to navigate high school and impress Jessica. And because he's Morty, and because Rick's portal gun is just lying around like a particularly dangerous paperweight, he decides to use it to, impress her. This, as you can imagine, goes spectacularly wrong. He uses the portal gun to quickly grab some ice cream for her, which then leads to him accidentally freezing time, which then leads to him using a time crystal to unfreeze time, which then leads to a series of escalating mishaps involving time travel, alternate timelines, and a whole lot of screaming. The time crystal, by the way, is one of those things that just exists in this universe, a convenient plot device that allows for all sorts of temporal shenanigans without ever really explaining the mechanics. It's like the writers just said, time travel? Sure, why not? Here's a crystal. Don't think about it too hard. Morty, in his desperate attempts to win Jessica over, ends up creating a temporal paradox that threatens to unravel reality itself, all because he wanted to get her a sundae. It's a classic Morty move, really. Good intentions leading to cosmic disaster. And speaking of cosmic disaster, Rick and Morty, at some point, find themselves trapped in a time-dilated dimension. Now, a time-dilated dimension is exactly what it sounds like. Time moves differently there. In this particular instance, it moves much faster. So while Rick and Morty are trying to figure out an escape, Morty starts to rapidly age. And I mean rapidly. He goes from a teenager to an old man, complete with a wife and kids, all while Rick is still, relatively speaking, the same age. It's a genuinely disturbing sequence, watching Morty live an entire lifetime, raise a family, and experience all the joys and heartbreaks of a full human existence, only for it to be, from Rick's perspective, a matter of hours or days. Rick, meanwhile, is just trying to fix the ship, completely oblivious to the emotional toll this is taking on Morty, or perhaps, more accurately, completely uncaring. He's focused on the technical problem, the escape, while Morty is experiencing an entire existential crisis. The whole thing is a brutal reminder of Rick's detachment and the casual cruelty of the multiverse. Morty eventually, and understandably, becomes incredibly resentful of Rick for essentially forcing him to live, and then abandon an entire family. It's a heavy episode, playing on the fragility of existence and the arbitrary nature of time. Then, because the universe demands balance, or perhaps just more trauma, Rick and Morty attend a family therapy session. Now you might be thinking, family therapy for Rick Sanchez? That'll go well. And you'd be right, it doesn't. This session is less about healing and more about airing out all the dirty laundry, which for the Sanchez family is a truly colossal pile. We get glimpses into Rick's deeply messed up past, his abandonment issues, his inability to connect emotionally, and how all of that has shaped his relationships with Beth, Summer, and Morty. It's a raw, uncomfortable look at the intergenerational trauma that plagues this family. And it's clear that Rick is the source of a lot of it. He tries to deflect, to intellectualize, to use his scientific genius to avoid confronting his own emotional failings. But the therapist, surprisingly, manages to cut through some of his defenses. It's a rare moment of vulnerability for Rick, even if it's a deeply unpleasant one for everyone involved. The session devolves into chaos, as you'd expect, but not before some truly painful truths are revealed about the family's dynamic and Rick's own deeply buried pain. And speaking of deeply buried pain, Rick and Morty then take a trip to Birdperson's home planet. Now, if you remember from way back when, Birdperson was Rick's best friend, a fellow revolutionary who fought alongside him against the Galactic Federation, before he was tragically killed at Rick's wedding by Tammy. Well, guess what? He's back. But not in a good way. He's been resurrected as a cyborg by Tammy, a twisted parody of his former self, a weaponized version of Rick's closest friend. It's a gut punch, not just for Rick, but for anyone who remembers the genuine bond they shared. Birdperson, now Phoenix Person, is a tragic figure, a puppet of the Federation, his free will stripped away, his body augmented with cold, unfeeling technology. This visit to his home planet isn't just a casual catch-up, though. It's a deep dive into Birdperson's backstory, and by extension, Rick's. We learn more about their time fighting against the Galactic Federation, their shared idealism, their camaraderie, and the brutal realities of war. We see flashbacks to a younger, more hopeful Rick, a Rick who still believed in something, a Rick who had genuine connections. It's a stark contrast to the cynical, nihilistic Rick we know, and it highlights just how much he's lost, how much he's been broken by his experiences. The Galactic Federation, for those who need a refresher, is the intergalactic governing body that Rick has been at odds with for decades, a bureaucratic authoritarian regime that he views as oppressive and utterly pointless. Birdperson and Rick were freedom fighters, rebels, trying to dismantle this oppressive system. It's a romanticized view of their past, perhaps, but it shows us a side of Rick that is rarely seen. Naturally, Rick and Morty decide they need to help Birdperson, or what's left of him, confront Tammy and the Galactic Federation. This, as you can imagine, leads to a violent, chaotic battle. It's a classic Rick and Morty action sequence, full of lasers, explosions, and gratuitous violence, but with an underlying current of genuine tragedy. Rick is fighting not just for Birdperson's freedom, but for a piece of his own past, for the memory of his friend. Tammy, meanwhile, is still the cold, calculating agent she always was, utterly ruthless in her pursuit of the Federation's goals. The battle is brutal, and while they manage to incapacitate Tammy, the victory feels hollow, because Birdperson is still not truly himself. And then, just when you think things can't get any more complicated, Birdperson discovers he has a daughter with Tammy. Yes, you read that right. Tammy, the agent who betrayed him, the woman who killed him, is also the mother of his child. And this child, naturally, is being held captive by the Federation. It's a truly baffling revelation, a twist that feels both absurd and deeply sad. Birdperson, who has just been resurrected from the dead and forced to fight his former lover, now has to contend with the fact that he's a father and his daughter is in enemy hands. The emotional whiplash is intense, and it adds another layer of tragedy to Birdperson's already incredibly tragic story. So of course Rick and Morty, because they're nothing if not predictable in their unpredictability, decide to infiltrate the Federation's prison to rescue Birdperson's daughter. This is another classic Prison Break episode, but with higher stakes than usual. They navigate the labyrinthine corridors of the Federation's most secure facility, facing off against guards, automated defences, and all sorts of alien threats. The goal is clear: get Birdperson's daughter out, and maybe, just maybe, give Birdperson some semblance of a future. This mission, however, inevitably leads to another confrontation with Tammy. She's still alive, still a threat, and still utterly dedicated to the Federation. The fight is personal, brutal, and ultimately a tragic conclusion to Tammy's story. She's defeated, but the cost is high, and the emotional scars run deep. Birdperson is reunited with his daughter, but it's not a joyous reunion. It's a somber one, tinged with the pain of his past and the uncertainty of his future. Meanwhile, back on Earth, or some equivalent dimension, Morty is still, being Morty. He encounters a group of Planetinas. Now, Planetina is basically a Captain Planet parody, a superhero who embodies the elements and fights for environmental justice. Except there are multiple of them, and they're all apparently in some kind of collective or perhaps just a very well-organised fan club. Morty, being a teenager with raging hormones and a desperate need for connection, becomes romantically involved with one of them. This, of course, leads to a moral dilemma. Planetina, in her noble quest to save the planet, often has to make morally ambiguous choices that Morty, with his still developing moral compass, struggles to reconcile. She's a force for good, but her methods are often extreme, and Morty finds himself torn between his love for her and his discomfort with her actions. It's a classic Rick and Morty exploration of utilitarianism versus individual morality, played out through the lens of a teenage romance. And then, because the writers clearly decided that this season needed to be a full-on emotional rollercoaster, Rick and Morty travel to a dimension where Rick has a fuck buddy named Daphne. Now, this is exactly what it sounds like. Daphne is a recurring character, a woman Rick has a purely physical relationship with, and it leads to some incredibly awkward encounters for Morty. It's another glimpse into Rick's incredibly dysfunctional personal life, a relationship devoid of emotional intimacy, purely transactional, and deeply uncomfortable for anyone witnessing it. It's a moment that highlights Rick's inability to form healthy, loving relationships, and his tendency to compartmentalize his life to avoid any genuine connection. Morty, of course, is mortified, forced to witness this incredibly personal and deeply weird aspect of his grandfather's existence. It's just another Tuesday for Rick, but for Morty, it's another layer of trauma to unpack in therapy, assuming he ever actually goes to therapy. We'll get to what happens next, and how the Citadel itself finally falls after this. And we see a younger Rick still reeling from the loss of his family, being approached by a council of Ricks. These guys, already established as the primary bureaucratic and legislative body governing the multiverse, offer him a spot among their ranks. They're basically saying, hey, we know you're super smart, come join the club, forget your troubles. But C-137, our Rick, he's not interested in their interdimensional bureaucracy. He's got a singular, burning purpose: vengeance. He refuses their offer, which is a pretty big deal because it sets him apart from literally every other Rick who eventually joined the council. This refusal is the first crack in the facade of his later, cynical persona. It shows a Rick driven by raw, unfiltered grief and a need for retribution. Not just scientific curiosity or a desire for power. He's not looking to collaborate. He's looking for a very specific, very dead Rick. It's around this time, as Rick C-137 is spiraling, that a rogue Rick, one we've seen before in flashbacks and hinted at as the architect of C-137's suffering, makes a pivotal appearance. This isn't just any rogue Rick. This is the Rick who, years prior, offered C-137 the portal gun technology, the very invention that would eventually define his life, and then in a truly diabolical twist was responsible for the death of his original, Diane and Beth. He reappears, not to gloat, but to subtly push C-137 further down the path of interdimensional travel. It's a cruel manipulation, a twisted act of mentorship designed to ensure C-137 becomes exactly what he needs him to be. A broken, obsessed genius. This rogue Rick, the sheer audacity of it, offering the tool of his own destruction to his victim. It's just, I don't know what to say. It's evil, but it's also incredibly efficient storytelling, I guess. So armed with this technology and fueled by an unquenchable thirst for revenge, Rick C-137 dedicates his entire existence to hunting down the Rick who murdered his family. This isn't a hobby. This is his new religion. He travels across countless dimensions, leaving a trail of chaos and destruction in his wake, all in pursuit of this one specific, elusive target. During this relentless chase, he does something truly monumental, something that fundamentally alters the fabric of the multiverse as we know it. He creates the central finite curve. Now, the central finite curve, for those not entirely caught up, is essentially a walled-off section of the multiverse. It's a curated collection of realities where Rick is always the smartest being, where his intellect reigns supreme, and where, crucially, he can continue his search without interference from Ricks who might be smarter or more powerful than him. It's a self-imposed prison, a giant cosmic filter designed to streamline his vendetta. It's also, a massive power move, essentially saying, I'm so smart, I'm going to create an entire section of reality just to make sure I'm still the smartest guy in the room. And he did it. He actually did it. Meanwhile, back on the Citadel of Ricks, which, remember, is the central hub for all Ricks and Mortys within the central finite curve, evil Morty has been quietly executing his master plan. He's not just some disgruntled Morty with a grudge. He's a strategic genius, a puppet master operating in the shadows for what feels like eons. His plan, finally coming to fruition, involves using a device, a truly massive, reality-bending contraption to break through the barrier of the central finite curve. This isn't just about escaping the Citadel, it's about escaping the entire construct that Rick C-137 so painstakingly built. He's not interested in ruling within the curve, he wants out of the entire system. And the way he goes about it is just spectacular. He manipulates the entire political landscape of the Citadel, engineers a massive uprising, and then, while everyone is distracted by the chaos, he activates his device. Evil Morty, in a chilling monologue, reveals his true motivation for all of this. He's not interested in power, not in the traditional sense anyway. He's sick of it all. He's sick of the infinite Ricks, the infinite Mortys, the endless cycles of abuse, the constant existential dread of being just one of countless variations. He sees the central finite curve not as a sanctuary for Ricks, but as a cage, a gilded prison designed to keep everyone, especially Mortys, subservient to the Ricks. His goal is simple: escape. He wants to find a universe, any universe, that exists outside of Rick's influence, outside of the endless, soul-crushing repetition. He's effectively saying, I want to be free of you, Rick, and everything you represent. It's a powerful moment, because for the first time, we see a Morty who is truly, genuinely independent, with a motivation that transcends the typical Rick and Morty dynamic. He's not trying to be a better Rick, he's trying to be not a Rick. As Evil Morty's device reaches its peak, the consequences are catastrophic. The Citadel of Ricks, that sprawling multi-dimensional metropolis, the very symbol of Rick's dominion, begins to tear itself apart. We see massive structural failures, explosions, Ricks and Mortys scrambling in terror as their entire world collapses around them. It's a truly apocalyptic scene, with debris flying, portals malfunctioning, and the very fabric of reality seemingly unraveling. The Citadel, once a bastion of Rick's power, is utterly destroyed, consumed by the sheer force of Evil Morty's escape. It's a visual metaphor for the shattering of Rick's control, a definitive end to an era. And it's not just a little explosion, it's a full-on, universe-shattering, everything you know is wrong kind of explosion. Rick and Morty, caught in the heart of this cataclysm, barely escape with their lives. They're not active participants in Evil Morty's plan, but rather collateral damage, swept up in the chaos. They're forced to abandon the collapsing Citadel, jumping through a portal at the last possible second, leaving behind the wreckage of what was once the centre of Rick's universe. It's a frantic, desperate escape, highlighting their vulnerability despite Rick's supposed omnipotence. For all his genius, he's powerless to stop Evil Morty's grand design. He's just another passenger on the runaway train. When the dust settles, Rick and Morty find themselves in a universe that is fundamentally different. They are now outside the central finite curve. This isn't just a new dimension. It's a new reality. The rules are different. The possibilities are infinite in a way they weren't before. It implies a new beginning, a fresh slate, but also a terrifying unknown. They've been living in a curated, controlled environment for so long, and now they're thrust into the true, unfiltered chaos of the multiverse. It's a massive shift, and the implications are staggering. No more guaranteed smartest Rick, no more predictable outcomes, no more safety net. It's a truly wild frontier now. In the immediate aftermath, Morty, having witnessed Rick's full origin story and the destruction of the central finite curve, confronts Rick. This isn't one of their usual squabbles. This is a deep, existential reckoning. Morty demands answers, pushing Rick to explain the true nature of their adventures, the real reason they've been bouncing around the multiverse. He understands now that their entire existence, their entire relationship, has been dictated by Rick's personal vendetta and the artificial boundaries of the central finite curve. He sees the manipulation, the lies, the carefully constructed facade. It's a moment of profound disillusionment for Morty, but also one of incredible growth. He's no longer just a sidekick, he's an equal, demanding accountability from his grandfather. This confrontation, this shattering of illusions, fundamentally redefines Rick and Morty's relationship. Morty, now armed with the full truth about Rick's past and the true nature of their multiversal existence, gains a new understanding of his grandfather. He sees not just the cynical, alcoholic genius, but the broken man beneath, driven by grief and a desperate need for revenge. It's not necessarily a reconciliation, but it's a deepening of their bond, a recognition of the shared trauma and the complex history that binds them. They're still Rick and Morty, but they're Rick and Morty in a post-central finite curve world, with a new, more honest, and arguably more fragile foundation. This isn't just a reset button, it's a complete re-evaluation of everything they thought they knew. They're standing at the edge of a truly unknown future, and for the first time, Rick seems almost as lost as Morty. So, with the central finite curve shattered, the citadels of Rick's a cosmic debris field, and evil Morty off to parts unknown, what exactly is the state of the multiverse? Are there other Ricks and Mortys outside the curve? Was evil Morty truly free, or just moving to a larger cage? What happens to all the Ricks who weren't C-137, the ones who were just living their lives within the curve? And what about Diane? Is she truly gone in every reality, or is there some sliver of hope, some dimension where she survived? Next time, we'll probably dive into something equally confusing, like the intricacies of the Bojack Horseman universe, the surprisingly complex lore of Adventure Time, or maybe even the surprisingly dark implications of SpongeBob SquarePants. You know, something light. Alright, so we left off with Rick and Morty, and frankly, the entire Smith family, in a bit of a pickle. A real pickle, actually, and not the fun, self-aware kind. We're talking about the 2022 era, the start of Season 6, and things are immediately, profoundly bad. Like universe-ending bad, if you're a stickler for portal fluid. See the Citadel, that sprawling multi-dimensional metropolis built by countless Ricks. Well, it's gone. Blown to smithereens, along with the central finite curve, that cosmic barrier Rick C-137 himself built to wall off all universes where he wasn't the smartest man alive. And because of that, because the curve is shattered, and because the Citadel is now just a cosmic dust bunny, our Rick's portal gun, the one device that allows him to literally ignore all consequences and jump to any reality at any time, is utterly, completely, irrevocably broken. Now this is a problem, a huge problem, because without a functioning portal gun, the Smith family, who were conveniently on the Citadel at the moment of its spectacular implosion, are now stranded. Not just stranded on a random planet, mind you, but stranded in space, drifting aimlessly in the wreckage of what used to be the heart of Rickdom. They're essentially space hobos, floating through the void, running out of oxygen, and generally having a terrible, no good, very bad day. And this, I have to say, is a genuinely refreshing change of pace, because for once Rick can't just bail them out with a quick portal jump. He's stuck. They're all stuck. And the sheer, unadulterated panic on his face, the way he's frantically trying to fix the unfixable, it's a beautiful thing to behold. It's almost like the universe is finally saying, "Hey Rick, maybe deal with your emotional baggage for once." But as with all things Rick and Morty, the universe has a strange way of intervening, usually in the form of another version of a main character. And in this case, salvation comes in the form of Space Beth. You remember Space Beth, right? The clone, or maybe the original depending on which theory you subscribe to, that Rick sent off into the cosmos to live her best, most adventurous life. Well, Space Beth, being the competent, portal gun-wielding badass she is, swoops in like a cosmic guardian angel. She finds them adrift in space and uses her portal gun to rescue them. She brings them back to Earth, to their home, which is a relief, I suppose, but also a new kind of prison, because while they're home, they're still fundamentally trapped. And this is where Rick drops the bomb. He gathers the family, and with a level of seriousness that is genuinely unsettling for him, he explains the situation. His portal gun is broken. Not just a little broken, not just needs a new battery broken, but fundamentally, catastrophically broken. He can't fix it, not yet anyway. And because of this, they are, for the foreseeable future, stuck on their original Earth. No more interdimensional cable, no more adventures to alien planets, no more escaping consequences by jumping to a reality where they don't exist. They are, for the first time in a very long time, forced to confront their lives and each other without the easy out of dimension hopping. It's a pretty big deal, I think, and the family's reactions are predictably varied. Summer is annoyed, Morty is bewildered, Beth is concerned, and Jerry, well, Jerry is Jerry. He's probably just happy not to be eaten by a sentient pizza. Speaking of Jerry, and his uncanny ability to stumble into bizarre situations, this period of forced domesticity actually leads to one of the more surprisingly insightful moments of the season. With no portal gun, and therefore no interdimensional cable, the family is stuck with regular, boring terrestrial television. But Jerry, being Jerry, manages to accidentally activate a device that projects alternate realities of himself. Not just random realities, mind you, but realities where Jerry is successful, where he's a hero, where he's a beloved celebrity. It's a fascinating inversion of the usual interdimensional cable premise, which usually focuses on the absurdities of other universes. This time, it's all about Jerry and his own deeply ingrained insecurities. It's a surprisingly poignant moment, actually, watching him grapple with the possibilities of what he could have been, if only he hadn't, been Jerry. It's a stark reminder that even without the cosmic stakes, the emotional stakes for these characters are still very real. And honestly, it's a testament to the writing that they can make Jerry's existential crisis genuinely compelling. Meanwhile, Rick is predictably not dealing with this forced grounding very well. He's holed up in his garage, surrounded by tools and half-finished inventions, desperately trying to repair his portal gun. But he's struggling. And that's a rare sight for Rick. He's usually the guy who can invent his way out of any problem, no matter how complex. But this time, the damage is different. It's not just a broken circuit or a depleted power source. There's something deeper, something more insidious at play. And as he delves deeper into the mechanics of his broken portal gun, he makes a chilling discovery. The damage isn't just random, it's linked. It's connected to Rick Prime's technology. This is a massive turning point. For seasons, Rick C-137 has been haunted by the ghost of Rick Prime, the Rick who murdered his original family, the Rick who set him on his path of interdimensional nihilism. But Rick Prime has always been an abstract concept, a boogeyman from his past, a motivation for his endless, often self-destructive adventures. Now, with the damage to his portal gun, Rick realizes that Rick Prime isn't just a memory. He's a tangible threat, an active force that has directly impacted his life, even in the present. And this realization sparks a shift in Rick. The casual, almost indifferent pursuit of Rick Prime, the kind of "I'll get to him eventually" attitude, transforms into something far more focused, far more personal. He begins to actively search for Rick Prime, his family's killer, with a renewed, almost obsessive intensity. This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about a direct personal confrontation. And of course, Morty, being Morty, is caught in the crossfire of Rick's renewed vendetta. He's always been aware of Rick Prime, in a vague, abstract sense. He knows Rick's backstory, the whole "killed my family" thing. But the true implications, the raw, visceral horror of what Rick Prime did, and what that means for Rick, and by extension, for Morty, really starts to sink in. Morty grapples with the weight of Rick's true past, the sheer trauma that drives him, and the dark, inescapable shadow that Rick Prime casts over their lives. It's a lot for a teenager to process, especially one who's already seen more cosmic horrors than most people could even imagine. He's not just an accessory to Rick's adventures anymore. He's intimately involved in Rick's deepest, most painful quest. To facilitate this renewed hunt, Rick does what any brilliant, emotionally stunted scientist would do. He creates a personal space for himself in the garage. It's not just a corner or a workbench, it's a dedicated, almost ritualistic space, completely sealed off from the rest of the house, where he can focus all his considerable intellect and resources on his hunt for Rick Prime. It's a physical manifestation of his singular, all-consuming goal. He's not just tinkering anymore. He's strategizing. He's building. He's preparing for war. And the family, particularly Morty, can feel the shift. The atmosphere in the house changes. Rick is less distracted, more driven, and frankly, a little more terrifying in his single-mindedness. This period, this forced grounding and the renewed focus on Rick Prime really tests and evolves the family's relationships, especially between Rick and Morty. They're forced to spend more time together, without the easy escape of other dimensions. Morty sees a side of Rick he's never truly seen before. The raw, vulnerable, deeply traumatized Rick, driven by an almost primal need for vengeance. And Rick, in turn, is forced to confront his relationship with Morty, not just as a sidekick, but as someone who is now intimately involved in his most personal demons. It's a messy, complicated, often painful process, but it's also a period of genuine growth in its own twisted way. But because this is Rick, and because emotional growth is a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of deal with him, he eventually resorts to his old habits. Morty, having learned too much, having seen too much of Rick's pain and the true, terrifying nature of Rick Prime, is becoming a liability, or at least Rick perceives him as one. So, in a moment that is both heartbreaking and entirely predictable, Rick uses a mind-blow device on Morty. He erases Morty's memories of Rick Prime's true nature, of the extent of Rick's trauma, of the deeper, darker implications of their quest. It's a classic Rick move. Protect his grandson, yes, but also protect himself from having to truly confront his own vulnerability. He wants Morty's help, but he doesn't want Morty to truly understand the cost. It's a temporary solution, of course, because nothing stays buried forever in this universe, especially not when Rick is involved. But for now, Morty is back to a more manageable level of ignorance, and Rick is free to pursue his vengeance with a slightly less emotionally complicated sidekick. And that, my friends, is just the beginning of the chaos that unfolds in this particular era. So, 2022 rolls around, and Rick is still, shall we say, a little preoccupied with his nemesis. But before we get too deep into the Prime situation, because that's a whole thing, we get a little detour, as is tradition. We find Rick, Morty, and Summer in what can only be described as a dino world. Now, this isn't just any planet with dinosaurs. Oh no, these are hyper-evolved, super-intelligent dinosaurs who have, apparently, solved literally every single problem facing their civilization. Like all of them, poverty, war, climate change, even the existential dread of being a sentient dinosaur, all handled. They're basically just chilling, occasionally popping over to Earth to offer solutions to humanity's problems, which naturally humanity rejects because, well, humans. Rick, being Rick, is initially annoyed by their sheer competence. He thrives on chaos and being the smartest guy in the room, and these dinosaurs just are. They've achieved true utopia, and it's deeply unsettling to him because it implies a universe where his particular brand of genius isn't constantly needed to avert disaster, which, let's be honest, is probably how he defines his self-worth. But this dinosaur interlude, while hilarious, is really just a palate cleanser before the main course of Rick's simmering rage. Because Rick Prime is still out there, and his continued existence is like a splinter in Rick's brain, driving pretty much every decision he makes, whether he admits it or not. It's the background hum of his entire life, the unresolved chord that keeps vibrating. And this obsession, this singular focus on one man, is starting to really wear on the family, especially Beth and Summer. Speaking of wearing on the family, we then get introduced to the truly bizarre concept of the Knight family. So the Smiths, in their infinite wisdom, decide to hire this entity, or group of entities. I genuinely have no idea what they are, but they're called the Knight family, and their whole deal is that they perform chores and maintain the house while the main family sleeps. Sounds great, right? Free labour, a perpetually clean home. What could go wrong? Well, as with all things in Rick and Morty, everything. The Knight family are these pale, silent, incredibly efficient beings who exist solely to serve during the hours of darkness. The family naturally starts taking advantage, pushing the boundaries, asking for more and more complex tasks, and the Knight family, being the Knight family, just does it. No complaints, no demands, just silent, tireless service, until, of course, they reach their breaking point. Because even silent, subservient entities that clean your house while you sleep have a breaking point. It culminates in this genuinely unnerving sequence where the Knight family, driven to their limits by the Smiths' endless demands, essentially revolt. It's a fantastic exploration of how even the most passive individuals or entities can be pushed too far, and how the Smiths, despite all their cosmic adventures, are still just deeply dysfunctional people who exploit anything they can get their hands on. It's also a nice subtle way to show how Rick's influence, his casual disregard for boundaries and consequences, has permeated the entire family. Anyway, back to Prime. The elephant in every room Rick enters. Summer and Beth, bless their hearts, finally confront Rick about his all-consuming obsession with Rick Prime. They see how it's poisoning him, how it's affecting all of them, how it's preventing him from moving on, from truly connecting with his current family. They point out that his quest for revenge, while understandable, is turning him into a worse version of himself, a man consumed by a past he can't change. And this is a big moment, because for a long time, Rick's grief and anger were almost sacrosanct, something the family tiptoed around. But now, they're calling him out on it, trying to pull him back from the brink of total self-destruction. Rick, of course, being Rick, dismisses it all or tries to. He's convinced that until Prime is dealt with, there can be no peace, no real life. And he's probably right from his perspective. The man murdered his original family after all. That's not exactly something you just get over. So what's a Rick to do when his family's nagging him and his arch-nemesis is still out there? He doubles down, naturally. Rick develops a new, more powerful portal gun. This isn't just a fancier model, mind you. This is a portal gun specifically designed to track Rick Prime across the multiverse. He's upgraded his tech not for exploration or scientific discovery, but for a singular, destructive purpose: vengeance. This new portal gun is the ultimate homing device for his personal white whale. It signifies a complete commitment to the hunt, a final irrevocable step down the path of retribution. He's not just looking for Prime anymore, he's actively hunting him with purpose-built technology. This is no longer a casual side quest, this is the main quest, the endgame. And the first major test of this new tech takes them to a truly bizarre dimension, even by Rick and Morty standards. Rick, Morty and Summer find themselves in a dimension where everyone is a Worm Rick clone. I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. Imagine Rick, but as a giant sentient worm. And not just one, but an entire society of them. All Ricks, all worms. It's a dimension of pure, unadulterated Rickness, distilled into a wriggling, segmented form. The implications of this are vast. Does this mean Rick Prime has been experimenting with cloning? Or is this just a natural, albeit horrifying, evolutionary path for Ricks in certain dimensions? The show doesn't really explain it, which is both frustrating and hilarious. It's just another piece of the multiverse's infinite absurdity, a testament to the sheer, unhinged creativity of the writers. But it also serves as a stark reminder of the sheer number of Ricks out there, and the terrifying possibilities of Prime's influence. It's around this time that Rick finally reveals his Omega device plan. Now this is a big one. The Omega device isn't just a weapon to kill Rick Prime. Oh no, that would be too simple. The Omega device is designed to erase Rick Prime from all realities, every single one. It's an act of cosmic genocide, aimed at a single individual. It's the ultimate expression of Rick's grief and rage, a desire to not only destroy his tormentor, but to utterly unmake him, to wipe him from the very fabric of existence. It's a plan so extreme, so absolute, that even Morty is taken aback. This isn't just about revenge, it's about rewriting history, about eliminating the source of all his pain, even if it means altering countless realities in the process. It's a terrifying escalation, a testament to how far Rick is willing to go. And it's also, arguably, a demonstration of just how powerful Rick truly is, that he can even conceive of such a device, let alone build it. With the Omega device ready, and the new portal gun pinpointing Prime's location, Rick and Morty finally confront Rick Prime in his hidden base. This is it. The big showdown. The culmination of decades of pain and searching. The base is, as expected, a marvel of Prime's twisted genius, filled with traps and advanced technology. The confrontation itself is brutal, violent, and deeply personal. It's not a clean fight. It's a desperate, messy brawl between two Ricks who hate each other with every fibre of their being. Rick, our Rick, is fighting with everything he has, fueled by the memory of his lost family, by the years of torment. He's not just trying to win, he's trying to destroy. But as is often the case with these things, it doesn't go as planned. Despite Rick's advanced tech, despite his sheer determination, he fails to kill Rick Prime. Prime, being the cunning, resourceful monster that he is, manages to escape. He slips away, leaving Rick battered, defeated, and more determined than ever. This isn't a setback, it's a reignition of the fire. The failure only hardens Rick's resolve. If anything, it makes him even more dangerous, because now he knows what he's up against, and he's tasted the bitter tang of near victory. The hunt isn't over, it's just entered a new, more intense phase. The stakes have been raised, the personal cost has increased, and Rick is now fully, irrevocably committed. And so, as the dust settles from this failed confrontation, the family begins to heal from the trauma of Rick Prime's existence, or rather, they try to. They've been through a lot, witnessed Rick's obsession firsthand, and seen the depths of his pain. There's a sense of cautious optimism, a hope that maybe, just maybe, Rick can start to move on, even if Prime is still out there. But the threat remains. Rick Prime is still a looming shadow, a sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. His escape means that the danger hasn't passed, it's merely been postponed. The family might be trying to mend, to find some semblance of normalcy, but they know, deep down, that this isn't over. Rick's quest, their involvement in it, is far from concluded. It's a temporary reprieve, a moment to catch their breath before the inevitable next round. And that, my friends, sets the stage for everything that comes next. So the big questions remain. What exactly is Rick Prime's ultimate goal, beyond just being a cosmic jerk? What other horrors has he unleashed across the multiverse? And how many more Ricks are out there, waiting to be discovered, or perhaps waiting to be erased by the Omega device. Next up, we could dive into the sprawling, confusing lore of Final Fantasy, or perhaps unravel the tangled web of Kingdom Hearts, or maybe even tackle the surprisingly deep history of SpongeBob SquarePants. Let me know what you want to see next. So after all that universe-hopping nonsense and the whole getting back to basics thing we saw at the tail end of the previous cycle, we finally arrive at the events that unfold around 2023. And this is where things get, well, focused. Rick and Morty, for once, have a singular driving purpose, which, considering the sheer chaos that usually defines their existence, is almost unsettling. Their mission, should they choose to accept it, and they absolutely do because Rick has no other choice, is the hunt for Rick Prime. This isn't just a casual, let's find him if we happen to be in the neighbourhood kind of hunt. No, this is a full-blown, all-consuming, multi-dimensional crusade, powered by a device that is, ironically enough, designed to track the very man Rick wants to erase from existence. They're zipping through an almost uncountable number of realities, each one a potential hiding spot for the architect of Rick's misery. It's like a cosmic game of hide and seek, except the stakes are, everything, and one of the players is a genocidal maniac. Now Morty, bless his ever-anxious heart, is along for the ride, but he's not entirely sure of the depth of this particular rabbit hole. Rick, in a rare moment of something approaching honesty, finally lets him in on a little secret. This isn't some spur-of-the-moment vendetta. Rick reveals that he's been on Rick Prime's trail for decades. Not just since the destruction of the Citadel, not just since the whole evil Morty debacle, but since the very moment Rick Prime murdered Diane and Beth. This revelation, while perhaps not entirely surprising to anyone who's been paying attention, still lands with the weight of 1,000 collapsed universes. It contextualizes every single one of Rick's seemingly random, self-destructive, and often profoundly cruel actions. Every dive into a vat of acid, every dismissal of Morty's feelings, every drunken rampage, it all funnels back to this singular, unyielding obsession. It's a pretty bleak picture when you realise the entire fabric of Rick's being has been woven around the pursuit of one man. As they jump from reality to reality, their journey is less a straight line and more a tangled web of encounters. They bump into various alternate Ricks and Mortys, because of course they do. The multiverse is, after all, teeming with them. Some of these variants are also on the hunt for Rick Prime, driven by their own, presumably equally tragic, motivations. Others, disturbingly, are allies of Rick Prime. This adds another layer of complexity, and because now every encounter is a potential trap, every friendly face a possible betrayal. It's a stark reminder that even within the infinite possibilities of the multiverse, the core conflict remains, replicated and twisted in countless forms. The sheer audacity of Rick Prime to not only exist, but to cultivate a network of loyalists across realities is frankly impressive in its depravity. You have to wonder what kind of charisma, or perhaps just sheer terror, he wields to command such allegiance. Meanwhile, back in what we're now calling the main reality, though that term feels increasingly meaningless, Birdperson, ever the stoic, ever the loyal friend, tries to do what he does best: help Rick process his trauma. He attempts to offer guidance, to help Rick confront the deep-seated pain that fuels his quest. Birdperson, being Birdperson, understands the weight of loss and the corrosive nature of unaddressed grief better than most. He sees Rick spiraling, becoming consumed by this singular purpose, and he tries to pull him back from the brink. But Rick, being Rick, largely dismisses his advice. He's too far gone, too deeply entrenched in his vendetta. He views Birdperson's attempts as distractions, as sentimental fluff that has no place in the brutal reality of his mission. It's a classic Rick move, pushing away the very people who care about him, convinced that his path is one he must walk alone, even if it leads to his own destruction. The irony, of course, is that Birdperson's wisdom is exactly what Rick needs, but Rick's pride and pain prevent him from accepting it. The stakes, already stratospheric, manage to somehow escalate even further. Rick and Morty make a horrifying discovery. Rick Prime isn't just some garden-variety multiverse terrorist. He's been creating what are terrifyingly dubbed Omega devices. And these aren't just big, flashy weapons. No, these are devices capable of erasing anyone from every single reality simultaneously. Think about that for a second. It's not just killing someone, it's unmaking them, wiping them from the fabric of existence across the entire multiverse. It's a level of nihilistic destruction that even Rick, with all his cynicism, finds genuinely unsettling. The implications are staggering. Rick Prime isn't just trying to avoid capture, he's building the tools to become the ultimate arbiter of existence, able to delete entire bloodlines, entire species, entire concepts if he so chooses. It's a power that makes the Galactic Federation look like a particularly aggressive neighborhood watch. As the hunt drags on, Rick's mental state, which was never exactly a picture of stability, deteriorates rapidly. He's showing clear signs of extreme stress and a single-mindedness that borders on psychosis. He's sleep-deprived, irritable, and his usual sardonic wit is replaced by a grim, almost desperate intensity. The jokes become fewer, the asides more bitter. He's a man possessed, driven by a primal urge for revenge that has consumed every other aspect of his being. Morty, ever the emotional barometer of the duo, becomes increasingly concerned. He sees the toll this quest is taking on Rick, and he starts to voice his fears. What happens after Prime is gone? What will be left of Rick once this all-consuming purpose is fulfilled? Will he find peace, or will he simply collapse into an even deeper abyss, having lost the one thing that defined his existence for so long? It's a legitimate question, one that Rick, in his current state, is utterly incapable of answering, or perhaps even contemplating. The chase, relentless and brutal, eventually leads them to a hidden base. Of course, Rick Prime wouldn't just be chilling in a suburban cul-de-sac. This is a fortress, a testament to his paranoia and his vast resources. The confrontation is, as expected, anything but civil. Rick Prime, ever the master manipulator, reveals his truly nihilistic philosophy. He doesn't just believe in the meaninglessness of life. He embraces it, revels in it, and uses it as justification for his atrocities. He taunts Rick, not just about Diane's death, but about Rick's inability to move on. He sees Rick's grief as a weakness, a pathetic attachment to a meaningless existence. It's a psychological assault, designed to break Rick, to prove the superiority of his own cold, detached worldview. He's not just a killer, he's a philosopher of despair, and he wants Rick to join him in that abyss. But Rick, for all his flaws, has one thing Rick Prime doesn't: a spark of something beyond pure nihilism, however buried it might be. And in that moment, fueled by decades of pain, rage, and a desperate need for closure, Rick finally confronts and kills Rick Prime. It's not a clean, heroic kill. This isn't some noble duel. This is a brutal, visceral beating. Rick doesn't just defeat him, he utterly annihilates him, unleashing every ounce of pent-up fury he's been carrying. It's revenge, pure and unadulterated, and it is ugly. The scene is a testament to the destructive power of grief and hatred, a culmination of everything Rick has been building towards since that fateful day. He doesn't just want Prime dead, he wants him to suffer. And then, as if the physical act of murder wasn't enough, Rick takes it a step further. He uses the Omega device, the very instrument of universal erasure that Prime himself created, to erase Rick Prime from all realities. Not just kill him, but to wipe him from existence, to retroactively unmake him across the entire multiverse. It's a complete annihilation, a final definitive act of vengeance that leaves no trace of his tormentor. It's a chilling moment, demonstrating Rick's capacity for extreme measures, and it raises profound questions about the nature of existence itself. Can something truly be gone if it's erased from every possible timeline? Or does the act of erasing it simply create a new, even more terrifying void? It's a philosophical nightmare wrapped in a sci-fi revenge fantasy. And with that, the long, painful hunt for Rick Prime finally comes to its brutal, definitive end. Or does it? Because in this universe, nothing is ever truly over, is it? We'll get to that, trust me. And that's when things just get, well, existentially messy. Because after all that, after the entire multiversal hunt, after finally getting his hands on Rick Prime, after killing Rick Prime, Rick C-137 is just empty. Utterly, profoundly, hilariously empty. You'd think, right, that achieving the singular goal that has driven your entire existence for decades would be, I don't know, satisfying? A moment of triumph? A little fist pump? Maybe a casual, "I told you so," to a random bystander? Nope, nothing. Just a kind of hollow echo where the all-consuming rage used to be. This is where the show really starts to lean into the emotional aftermath of that victory, or lack thereof. We see Rick, the guy who could build a universe in a garage and dismantle a god with a belch, just adrift. He's got no prime to chase, no ultimate villain to scheme against, no cosmic chess match to meticulously plan. His entire identity, for so long, was inextricably linked to this vendetta, this singular, burning need for revenge. And now it's gone. Poof. Like a bad dream you can't quite remember, but the lingering unease still sticks to you like old gum. He's essentially a dog who finally caught the car, and now he's just sitting there, panting, looking at the totaled vehicle, wondering what the hell he's supposed to do next. It's genuinely pathetic, in the most Rick Sanchez way possible. Morty, bless his perpetually traumatized heart, is of course right there in the thick of it, grappling with this new, somewhat aimless Rick. He's used to Rick being a lot of things: brilliant, cruel, self-destructive, occasionally heroic, always chaotic. But aimless? That's a new one. Morty, ever the surprisingly insightful moral compass, tries to understand what's going on. He sees Rick going through the motions, taking on what are, for Rick, incredibly mundane or low-stakes adventures. We're talking about a guy who used to fight literal gods and interdimensional fascism, and now he's, I don't know, helping some alien civilization retrieve a lost sock puppet. It's a drastic downshift. Morty, in his own fumbling way, tries to poke and prod, to figure out what makes Rick tick when the prime-shaped hole in his chest isn't screaming anymore. He's trying to find the new Rick, or at least help Rick find himself, which is an impossible task for a teenager who still struggles with basic algebra. Rick, in his desperate attempt to fill this gaping void, does exactly what you'd expect a genius sociopath to do. He attempts to find new meaning, initially by focusing on these less significant adventures, these almost deliberately trivial pursuits. It's like he's trying to convince himself that these small inconsequential victories are enough, that they can somehow replace the decades-long pursuit of his nemesis. He's building increasingly complex gadgets for increasingly stupid reasons. He's solving problems that a slightly above average intern could probably handle. He's essentially over-engineering everything, not because it's necessary, but because the act of doing something, anything, is better than sitting in his garage staring at a wall. It's a coping mechanism, a very elaborate, very Rick-esque coping mechanism that mostly involves him being even more condescending than usual about the triviality of everything around him, probably to distract from the triviality of his own existence post-prime. And who better to observe this unravelling than Birdperson? Our stoic, long-suffering Birdperson, who has seen Rick at his absolute worst and, occasionally, his slightly less worst. Birdperson, with his detached wisdom and encyclopedic knowledge of Rick's various psychological failings, notes Rick's post-prime behaviour with a kind of weary resignation. He sees through the bravado, through the forced indifference, and recognises the continued struggle with grief and trauma. Birdperson understands that killing Prime didn't erase the past, it just removed the target of Rick's fury. The wounds, the deep, festering emotional wounds from losing his Diane and Beth, those are still there, just as raw as ever. Birdperson's observations are always so understated, yet they carry such weight, because he's one of the very few characters who truly knows Rick, who has seen the man behind the nihilistic facade. He's the one who understands that revenge, while it might feel good in the moment, is a terrible long-term solution to existential despair. Meanwhile, the rest of the family is just trying to, live their lives. They continue to navigate their complex dynamics and new adventures, often with Rick in a more subdued or reflective mood. Beth and Summer are still dealing with their own issues. Jerry is still jerrying, and the general chaos of the universe continues unabated. Rick's shift, even if it's an internal one, has a ripple effect. He's less prone to grand, destructive gestures, less likely to drag them into truly apocalyptic scenarios purely for his own amusement or self-loathing. He's still a jerk, don't get me wrong, but there's a subtle shift. It's like the volume on his cynicism has been turned down from an 11 to, say, an 8. Still loud, still annoying, but perhaps slightly more tolerable. They're still getting into bizarre situations because that's just the nature of their existence, but Rick's motivation for engaging in them feels different. Less about escape, more about, still escape, but a less desperate, more exploratory kind of escape. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rick begins to reconnect with his family. Not in a big, emotional, hug-it-out kind of way, because this is Rick Sanchez we're talking about, and that would probably cause the universe to collapse. But there are moments, small, significant moments, a shared glance, a slightly less sarcastic comment, a grudging admission of something resembling affection. He's still got his characteristic cynicism, of course. He's not going to suddenly start baking cookies and joining family game night, but the walls, which had been reinforced with the concrete of his prime vendetta, seem to have developed a few cracks. The absence of that singular, all-consuming purpose has left space for other things, other people, to seep back in, even if he fights it tooth and nail. It's a slow, painful process, like watching a glacier move, but it is movement nonetheless. Morty, ever the optimist, or perhaps just deeply tired of Rick's moping, tries to encourage Rick to find new passions or purpose beyond his former vendetta. He's suggesting hobbies, new scientific endeavours that aren't purely destructive, maybe even, dare I say it, healthy outlets. Morty, in his own way, is trying to give Rick a reason to get out of bed in the morning that isn't just avoid dying or destroy a universe because I'm bored. He's trying to remind Rick that there's more to life than just revenge, that there are other things to care about, even if those things are just like finding the perfect interdimensional sandwich or something. It's a valiant effort, and one that Rick, in his own roundabout way, occasionally seems to acknowledge, even if he immediately dismisses it with a dismissive belch and a lecture about the futility of all existence. But the seed is planted, and this is where we see Rick reflect on his past actions and the cost of his revenge, hinting at a potential shift in his character. He's not overtly saying, "I regret everything," because that would be profoundly out of character. But there are quiet moments of introspection, where he seems to be genuinely contemplating the decades he spent chasing this ghost, the relationships he destroyed, the opportunities he squandered, the sheer amount of emotional collateral damage he inflicted on everyone around him, including himself. He sees the emptiness of his victory, and for the first time it seems, he's truly grappling with the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was a better way. This isn't a redemption arc, not yet, but it's a moment of genuine self-awareness, a crack in the armour of his nihilism that suggests he might, eventually, be capable of something resembling personal growth. It's a monumental shift for a character who has, for so long, been defined by his refusal to change. Of course, the universe, being the chaotic, indifferent entity that it is, doesn't care about Rick's emotional journey. It continues to present new challenges and bizarre scenarios, forcing Rick and Morty into new, often absurd adventures. There are still alien empires to overthrow, cosmic entities to outsmart, and interdimensional bureaucracy to navigate. Rick and Morty are still Rick and Morty, and the show is still the show. The external conflicts are still there, providing the framework for their escapades, but now, layered beneath the surface, is this quiet, internal struggle for Rick. It's a fascinating dynamic, where the traditional sci-fi hijinks are now serving as a backdrop for a much more personal, character-driven story about grief, purpose, and the long, slow road to self-acceptance, or at least self-tolerance. It's a testament to the show's writing that they can maintain the absurdity while also delving into such profound emotional territory. So where does this leave us? We've got a Rick who achieved his ultimate goal and found it to be a hollow victory. A Rick who is slowly, begrudgingly, trying to find new meaning in a universe that doesn't care. A Rick who might, just might, be on the cusp of something resembling personal growth. But what is that new meaning? Can Rick truly change, or is he doomed to repeat his self-destructive patterns in a new, slightly less vengeful way? What happens when the universe inevitably throws another Rick-level threat at him? Will he revert to his old ways? And what about evil Morty, out there in his own separate, prime-free reality? Is his story truly over, or is he just biding his time, waiting for his own moment to re-enter the narrative? These are the questions that keep me up at night, genuinely. These are the threads left dangling, the cosmic mysteries that demand answers. For the next video, I'm thinking we could dive deep into the lore of the Venture Bros, or maybe unravel the convoluted history of Homestuck, or perhaps even take a crack at the truly mind-bending timeline of Kingdom Hearts. Let me know what you think. So after all that, what do we have? A multiverse born of a single, horrific decision, endlessly replicating and fracturing, all to avoid a single, horrific truth. Our genius, haunted by a past he created, chasing a phantom of his own making, only to find himself trapped in a cycle of his own design. And that is the complete Rick and Morty timeline.